here for us all to get started. Welcoming everybody to the Special Infrastructure Committee meeting of November 13th. It is 6:30, so we will get started. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, whom we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with, the people of the Songhees and Kosepsum First Nations. The next item is calling us to order. And I do apologize, some updates to the materials were sent out by email today. And we are looking for an approval of the agenda as presented. Moved by Member Conrad. And any additions or deletions? Oh,
thank you, Chair. Are we going to get an update on the sustainable infrastructure? We didn't know where it was going.
I will speak to that when we are getting there. Basically, that is a project that is led through our finance department. So the people who are here tonight are a little less able to give us an update on it throughout the, but you could. All right. Perfect. We will let John speak to that. Do you want that at the top of our agenda? Yeah, that sounds like a good place for it. Let's get it all out of the way. So we'll make that number 2 or number 2.1, and then we will renumber everything else accordingly. So right after approval of the agenda, we'll do update on the sustainable infrastructure plan. All right, so the approval of the agenda was moved by Member Conrad. Is any, we have the addition, anyone opposed to the agenda? None opposed, that's carried. John, do you want to tell us about sustainable infrastructure?
Thank you, Chair. I did have a chance to talk to Ms. Hepting, who's the lead on that project. And it is their intent to come back to the committee with an update on that work program. But they are right now having some capacity issues. So she wasn't able to give me a date on when you'll see it, but you will be seeing it in the future.
Yeah, I think they were delayed by some compatibility software issues as well. And I neglected to see Taylor has his hand up from Zoom, so maybe you could let him speak. Oh, that was your mouse? Okay. If anybody sees a hand up from the people who are joining by Zoom, please make sure to shout at me, because I sometimes miss the Zoom while I'm trying to manage the multitude of things. All right. Next, we will have the minutes. Now, I had a hard time trying to decipher our motion from last time. I did transcribe it and provide it to the membership by email. We've added that here. There's been a little bit of discussion since then about, you know, when we're talking about Machosen Road, there's been a bit of a 3-lane, 4-lane discussion when we were evaluating the model. I'm not sure what the best language to use is. It was my understanding the model kind of has either 2 lanes or 4 lanes. There's no 3-lane language that fits within the model itself. So I think it's important that the committee say what they mean. And I think the interpretation can come from there, because I think we all know that if a road has 4 lanes on it. It has 4 lanes that you could travel in, and if it has 3 lanes, but I don't quite understand the semantics issue there, but there is a difference between, yeah. Um, Perhaps can we do the minutes first? I'm just trying to say, we don't quite know how to make that language work for all parties here. Um, and I wanted to add something to the minutes, because we had a motion that was carried, and then through the discussion that ensued, it became clear to me that we didn't have a majority in agreement with that motion. So I just wanted to add that discussion after the vote clarified that the majority were not in agreement. So there's some understanding that I didn't just scuttle the committee's motion. And then I've done my best to look at the motion that we put forward and put it in black and white, and staff have that ready to put up on the screen so that everyone could see it and perhaps discuss it. And the only, yeah. And I just want to mention that it to those who are on Zoom, if you if I can't see your hand because we're sharing on the screen, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me so that we don't miss you. It's not my intention to miss you. It's just kind of hard with Zoom to see your hands. And when I sent that around to everybody, I agree with this, but not with that. Everybody has a little bit different perspective. And I wanted to clarify that council was not anticipating recommendations from this committee at this time. We're fairly early in the decision-making process. We're still at trying to put all the information out there from staff and have the committee understand and go out to the committee, to the community, sorry, to hear from them as well and continue that discussion. But I think it's important that if the committee wants to suggest things to council, that they are able to do so. So I'm at that somewhere in the middle stage of trying to say this is what the committee was thinking, and whether or not you want to send this forward to council at this time is in the committee's hands. I have not put this forward to council yet because I didn't feel I had a clear understanding that I could represent you well at the council table in support of the motion. Councillor Jordison. Oh, sorry. Come on.
Can I make a recommendation that perhaps we revisit this motion after we hear from Mr. Andrews on the traffic model simulation? Would that be helpful?
What does the committee think?
I agree.
Okay, we will revisit the motion. So shall we table the minutes for now then? Okay. Would you like to move that we table the minutes for till after the discussion?
We can table the minutes till after the discussion.
Thank you. Is anyone opposed to tabling the minutes until after the discussion? Seeing none, that is carried. All right. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm losing my spot on my agenda. Too many pieces. Yeah. Now we have opportunity for public participation. Is there anyone online? No, I don't think so, other than committee members. And there's no one in the audience. Therefore, we will move on then to the traffic model simulation. Josh.
Thank you. Really okay, Marcy? Almost. Oh, great. That'll be for Dan in just 2 minutes. But that's just great. That's just great. I just wanted to preface that presentation. Welcome back, everyone. As you know, we're here tonight to inform the committee on the process of updating the TMP and the work that will go into that. Following last meeting, the first presentation tonight, which was a recent addition to the agenda, will provide some clarifications and some answers to some of the questions that were asked, as well as more information on the traffic model from Urban Systems. The handouts that you have tonight summarize the information from a couple weeks ago and are now also available on the Let's Talk page for the public. The purpose, as you stated earlier, the purpose of this is to inform the committee so that they can act as an ambassador to the public as we move forward with the engagement process and the TMP update. Following that TMP update process, we'll be then seeking staff committee's recommendation for adopting that updated TMP. So now I'd like to, first introduce.
I'm just going to slow you down for 1 sec, just to let you know that none of the committee members, certainly not myself, have had time to review the revised attachments that were sent out today. So those are new information. So I think I heard a comment earlier prior to the meeting that we would like to know what the difference is between what was shared prior to today and what the update is that was provided today.
Thank you. Yes, great question. The handouts today were just meant to try to summarize the information that was presented last meeting in three. The hope was that we were one-pagers that committee could reference through the night if they had any questions or couldn't remember what had been discussed in previous weeks. Those also work to help inform the public, which is why they were published on the Let's Talk page for the process of the update, the model, the scenarios we're looking at. No new information is on those handouts. It's everything as discussed last meeting. So yes, as I was saying, I'd like to first introduce Ming Xia, also from Urban Systems. She's a transportation engineer and the planner that, and the guru, I guess, when it comes to the model. She'll be speaking to the model later on in the presentation. And of course, Dan Casey from Urban Systems, who really needs no introduction at this point, who will speak to the model and answer some of the questions from last week. Dan, all yours.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Josh. So yeah, happy to be back here tonight to shed a little bit more light on some of the, I think we heard some comments and some questions a few weeks back in our first meeting here around the traffic model that we wanted to come back with a little bit more additional information to hopefully answer some of the questions that were raised or maybe provide a little bit more confidence in the model and its outcomes. As Josh mentioned, I'm here again. I'm glad to be here. My colleague Ming, who's actually sort of the author of the model, is on the line as well. And so she's going to, I'll start us off with a quick recap on what we talked about last week. I'm going to go more thoroughly through the two shortlisted options, the major road network options that we contemplated the last meeting. And then Ming's going to dive in a little bit on some of the details of the model. And I'm hopeful that that'll answer some of the questions that came up the other couple of weeks back. Okay, so a quick recap. So we talked last time around why the model and what the model is. And in doing so, there's a little bit of what the model isn't baked into that as well. So why the model? It supports long-range road network planning. It helps identify locations and timeframes for investment in the street network. Allows the city to study and determine the impact of future development. And then I think this last piece is important, and it hasn't really been part of these discussions necessarily, but as new applications come forward in future, the model will be a basis to compare some of the traffic work that these site-specific studies are undertaking to make sure that they're aligned with what we see for the city as a whole. So what it does, uses existing and future land use and development to estimate future travel demand. So it's based on trips and trip making patterns. It estimates travel distribution based on patterns that are known to represent today, and then based on any future changes in terms of either added capacity or connections that might happen in the network in future. And then it assigns future trips between a series of zones. And so last time around, we introduced the map on the right here, which divides Colwood into 22 zones. And I believe there were 8 external zones as well. And all of the travel demand and the trip making happens between each of these zones. We also talked about how the model represents the morning peak conditions, which is sort of the most concentrated and predictable period for traffic. So there was a fair bit more, but in the presentation from a couple of weeks ago, but we sort of got to the sort of 2 key candidate scenarios. Those are the ones on the screen in front of us. The one on the left represents corridor widening on Latoria with a package of improvements on Machosen Road as well. And the image on the right focuses on a 4-laning along the length of Machosen with a package of improvements along Latoria as well. And so there was a fair bit of dialogue around exactly what's behind these 2 scenarios. In a little bit here, we've got some added information. We've got some new maps that we think do a more complete job of describing all of the improvements that are to be included in each of these scenarios. So there's a little bit more coming on that.
Can I just pause you there for 1 sec? Just the map is overlaying the scenario 2C1, which is 4-laning Machosen Road, which is debatable between 3 and 4. And what's cut off is Veterans Memorial Parkway.
Oh, interesting. Yes.
So
correct.
it's
Yeah.
not Machosen and Latoria or VMP and Latoria, it's VMP and Latoria or Machosen and VMP.
Correct. Yeah, good catch. That's not on my printed copy, but it seems to be on the screen. Okay, and then we sort of did a recap on the modeling work and the package, the 2 different packages of improvements. There's a way to get acceptable and comparable traffic conditions under each scenario. But we sort of concluded on that there's other things we should be considering beyond simply traffic performance in determining which package of improvements would be the preferred way to go. So we talked about traffic performance. We also talked about things like the potential and timing for redevelopment along these corridors and how much time it might take and how complex it might be to assemble the additional width, the additional right-of-way needed to achieve a 4-laning on either of these scenarios. We talked about complications around utilities and either pole movement and or potential undergrounding, which has significant complication and cost. We talked about some environmental concerns, and we talked generally about the capital cost associated with each scenario. And so this is really where we kind of concluded last time around, especially with respect to the presentation. And obviously there's a good dialogue and Q&A that came after that. So next I was going to move to some of the new additional information. Before I do, happy to pause.
Thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to, did I hear you say that under either scenario, the traffic congestion or traffic performance is about the same? So that similar results if you do option A or option B?
That's how we build these scenarios, is to try to get them up to a level that we believe in the future they'll still be acceptable and comparable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
I think
Big step. That's news to me. So thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah. I think part of that too, if I could, was just, we also entertained scenarios where only a single corridor was widened, like maybe just VMP or even just Machosen, say, and concluded under that ultimate build out scenario that we were talking about, which is kind of all of South Colwood, the traffic conditions would not be okay. So those weren't advanced. We also entertained a scenario of VMP, Latoria, and Machosen all being widened. And the conclusion there was that because the two scenarios that were shortlisted, we believe we can get to a decent and acceptable traffic performance, that the cost and complication associated with trying to widen all three was excessive.
Roger.
Dan, for clarification, I want to be sure on the right of way, Machosen Road, 1 to 3 meters required. That's 80 parcels. Now I'm assuming that is Machosen Road from Latoria to Souk Road.
Correct. Yeah.
And if that's the case, do the new sidewalks that were poured 3 or 4 years ago have to be removed to do that?
I can't say for certain, but my hunch is yes, they would be. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving along. So we heard the conversation around the table a couple of weeks back and took back some of the, I think the flavor and nature of the conversation, and just wanted to come back with some additional information that we hope helps answer some of the questions that came up and provide a little bit more confidence in how this work was done and where it's going. So I'm going to start by, we developed some visuals to, we hope, help better communicate what's involved in both of the two shortlisted scenarios. So I'm going to work through those. And then my colleague Ming is in the meeting right now online, and she's going to speak to some of the details of the modeling work, including kind of expanding on what the difference is between the citywide travel demand model, what intersection modeling looks like, and what simulation looks like.
Can I just get you to back up one slide and just, I just wanted to, there's a big difference in looking at the costs there, but what have you included in your estimates for those capital costs?
Yeah. So there's a linear cost. So each meter of road expansion is given a cost, and that was consistent across both options.
But it doesn't consider the environment that you're in. So I just feel like it's maybe kind of 6 of one on one side and half a dozen on the other, because you're considering the impact on mature trees, but you're not considering what the substructure under the road is, whether that's easy road, difficult road. So I just feel like we've got kind of a mixed bag of potentials there. These are not very exact references, but they're ballpark. Correct?
They're definitely ballpark, and maybe if I could, I'll expand. So beyond the simple cost per meter multiplied over the length of each of the two corridors, that's the basis. There were additional costs attributed for challenges that each corridor presents. So utility relocation was factored in. I believe there was a cost carried for environmental. I will admit all of these costs are very sort of high level estimates. It's difficult to get more specific without having a design in place. We factored for property allocation, what would need to be taken, and the market cost of that to obtain that, to achieve these. Yeah, so we did factor for a number of these items, admittedly extremely high level.
Yeah, I just want to be careful that we don't present them as bona fide estimates, because we know from other work that we do that we can be very wrong about how much it costs to do things.
Yep.
The roundabout on Latoria being a very good example of that, costs a great deal more than we anticipated. So I want to be careful that we present a realistic expectation with our figures.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Carry on.
Okay. Okay, so I think last meeting, there's a fair bit of dialogue around understanding. It's not quite so binary as to say it's 4-lane this one or it's 4-lane that one. It's actually a package of improvements that is sort of focused on 4-laning of this one versus that one. But I had the sense that there was a desire to sort of better explore and understand what those supporting improvements might also be, not simply just which corridor gets widened. So we've pulled together a series of maps here to help visualize that. And so maybe I'll walk the group through those, but then please throw up your hand or interrupt if anything you'd like me to pause on and explain a little bit more. So here's your major road network in South Colwood. Now, we talked last time around, there are some improvements that we are suggesting need to happen in the scenario or in the network, regardless of scenario. So that's what's being shown on the screen here. So that's a 4-laning Veterans Memorial all the way down south to Latoria, shown in thick red line. That's the 4-laning, the remaining portion of Souk Road. That section we talked a fair bit about between Machosen Road and VMP. And that's the northern section of Machosen, Latoria to Souk. And then that's the Allendale extensions that we talked about as well. So not 4-laning of those, but the connection of those at a 2-lane scale.
Can I just ask why Veterans Memorial is deemed as requiring those additional lanes from Carindale to Latoria? That's not typically an area where I see backup. I see people drive that section quick, and sometimes there's long lines of traffic, but that is not necessarily meaning that those improvements would lead to any better commute times for anyone or capacity issues.
Yeah, that was part of the modeling exercise. There were a fairly large number of scenarios that were explored. One, or at least one of them, was a scenario that didn't include widening of VMP and focused widening more over on the Machosen corridor. It didn't perform very well from a traffic perspective. And so that's where it didn't really land as one of the two candidate options in the end.
So the model itself drove that decision for the improvements on VMP to be all the way from Latoria to Souk Road.
Yeah, the two shortlisted scenarios, the ones that resulted in acceptable traffic performance, both include VMP in its entirety. Yeah.
Okay, Stuart.
A couple of questions, and these are all based on full build out numbers, or are they build out OCP numbers?
Full build out.
And so I guess you do a lot of different scenarios. Have you looked at it at OCP build out as opposed to full build out?
So we started with, I want to say 3 scenarios. And I'm afraid I might not get this entirely correct, but we started with basic scenarios for both OCP and for full build out. And everything generally works acceptably in those scenarios under the OCP scenario horizon. Not so much with the full build out. So that's where the emphasis was put on some sub scenarios, more scenarios, but specific to the full build out.
Sorry, so you're saying that up to OCP densities, existing roads work? You don't need to do anything?
Not existing, no.
So what you're showing here is needed for OCP build out? Or where's the break?
I'd have to go back and get specifics for you on that. We've done the work.
Sorry.
I don't have the slide deck.
But same sort of questions on the section of Wishart that's proposed to go to 4 lanes. Is there sort of a trigger on that? Does it work at OCP but not at full build out? Or do you sort of have a trigger when when that's
Sorry,
required?
did you
Metchosin?
said Wishart, did you mean Metchosin?
Yes, yeah, everybody knew that.
It
Sorry.
was implied. The exact trigger on that, I honestly don't know off the top of my head. We can get back to you on that. The work's been done.
I'm sorry, I know, this is a long process, so there's lots of time for,
Yeah.
to put it. And then the other question I sort of have is Souk Road from VMP to Metchosin. 4-laning that seems to me to encourage more traffic to hit that Metchosin Souk intersection, which we know is going to be problematic.
Mhm.
And was there a scenario looked at where it wasn't 4-laned, and did that improve things at all
Mhm.
at that intersection? And is that like a detailed thing that it's unfair to ask you at this point?
We definitely looked at scenarios with and without the 4-lane in there. Again, I don't have the details off the top of my head, but absolutely, your sort of hunch is correct that if we restricted capacity in that section of Souk Road, we would not see as much traffic through that.
Might
Souk
improve the
Metchosin.
performance at the Metchosin.
It probably would. Yeah. Yeah. You'd still see a fair bit of demand up and down the Metchosin corridor and then Souk Road to the north and east. But more so avoiding the section you're focused on, the piece between VMP and Metchosin. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Roger.
Dan, in theory, I understand this, but in practicality, I'm having difficulties. I don't know who you've spoken to, but I've spoken to a lot of people. And they're telling me that if Colwood expects them to leave Beachlands or Royal Bay, drive up Latoria, to go onto Veterans Memorial, out to the Island Highway, and down into town, they have their heads someplace because it's not going to happen. It's a longer distance, takes a greater time. And with my own practical studies I've done, you can be in your car in a year up to 75 hours longer taking that route than you do Metchosin to Souk Road to the old Island Highway, to the Island Highway. I've heard people here say we'll encourage people to use Latoria to Veterans Memorial. In the previous council, I heard words as strong as we will force people to do that. How are we going to force or encourage people to use Latoria to Veterans Memorial over using Metchosin Road?
I don't believe there'll be any sort of forcing people to choose one direction over another. I think some of the choices that are made in terms of where improvements and capacities added will encourage trip patterns in a certain direction. I don't. There won't be an ability to force anyone to go where they don't want to go. It'll be a choices made by a large number of motorists.
Yourself, would you be willing to travel a greater distance, taking a longer time to get to the same location versus a shorter distance in a shorter time?
Me personally,
Yes.
suppose I did tonight. I took Ocean Boulevard rather than stay on Souk Road. I honestly don't drive a ton. So when I'm on my bike, I do choose direct routes.
And do you not think people in vehicles do the same thing?
Probably, yeah. 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 That's fair. I think to John's point, the model operates on anticipated travel times. So where congestion is anticipated, that's a slowdown. And the model basically predicts a balanced scenario. And so that's not necessarily saying resident from Beachlands needs to go and use VMP. that sort of means there's going to be a balancing where, and again, I don't think it's Beachlands, but it's somewhere in Royal Bay and down Latoria where those people choose that direction and these other people choose the other direction. So it is based on predicted conditions and predicted travel time. Yeah, not distance, travel time.
I think there is potentially another factor that hasn't been considered yet in this model, and that is for Colwood. One of the things that we've been trying to do is work towards economic development in Colwood, and there's a lot of work coming on that. And if our traffic is in fact more facilitated to go to a different business center, not a Colwood business center, then that's going to be just another barrier to economic success in Colwood's commercial districts. So there's something I just wanted to flag that
Yeah.
for everyone's consideration, because one of the reasons for making traffic better in Colwood, to have better circulation within Colwood, given that last time we talked about this, there's not a lot we can do about the gridlock outside of Colwood. But it is definitely important to the economic well-being of Colwood that you can travel within Colwood to local business districts, which would include the Triangle Lands. So that's another reason to consider. There are people in Colwood on Souk Road, exiting Fulton, exiting Cecil Blog, who would be traveling through this corridor to get to any number of our more commercial nodes that we need to consider facilitating. So just in the well-roundedness of our planning, I'd just like to put a pin in there that accessing Colwood's economic development hubs is important to informing our transportation planning.
Can I add a piece of information on top of that?
Sure.
It's interesting and neat you brought that up. More relative to the transportation master plan update process, we've done a little bit of background work and sort of seeing what's changed since the last TMP was developed about 10 years ago. And on that point about trip distance, and we'll call it internal trips rather than more intercommunity or regional trips, there's some encouraging trends, I suppose, in the most recent census compared to previous census. We're seeing that a higher percentage of trips, of the overall trips, begin and end within Colwood. So they're internal trips, which is a good thing. It's still relatively low compared to the regional average, but it's better than it's been historically. So that's encouraging. And I think the other piece we can take from this with respect to trips to work or commute trips is that we're seeing, again, a larger percentage of the total number of trips being shorter time duration. So whether they're entirely internal to Colwood or not, we don't know through that stat for certain, but we do know that on average, trip to work length, time duration is decreasing.
So knowing that our origin destination trips change over time with our model, how do we understand from our model whether or not what we're seeing in our model makes sense to what we know about our community?
Yeah, so I think we actually have a map to show these later, but we populated the model with land use of today. It was actually of last year, but current land use, ran the model based on anticipated trip making, based on those land uses, sort of put a pin in that, and then went out and assembled a whole series of traffic counts to make sure that then what the model under an uncalibrated scenario was saying reflected the actual traffic volumes we see on the roads. And so where there were inconsistencies, where the actual count said something different than the model was recalibrated to reflect the counts rather than the land use drive the traffic. So then in future, there's no certainty on exactly the time frame this would occur on, but the exact same thing can be done over again in future. We update the land use based on what occurs over a 5 or a 10-year period. We can then go out and recount those same count locations and see what the level of change has been. And then again, recalibrate the model again to reflect what's actually happening on the ground. And so there's really no limit to that. It can be done as frequently as we feel is necessary. It can be done maybe on patterns that follow either partial or fulsome updates to the transportation master plan. It can be done, I guess, as frequent as we need.
And does the model speak at all to specifically when each section, like imagining that, we naturally intuitively would know that the section from Carindale to Souk Road would be different than the section from Carindale to Latoria, for example, talking about VMP. Would our model be able to give us an estimate of what just-in-time construction would look like?
We can get there. Its model outputs are basically traffic volumes. Those go into like an intersection level modeling, which we got a little bit of information on later. And that can tell us the conditions under which, so the land use, the level, like the extent of the build out, where that intersection or that section of road is operating at an unacceptable level, typically a level of service D or E. Where the challenge comes in, it's very difficult to say, 2047, because it's all based on trip making that's associated with development. And we all know development, there's not a lot of certainty as to exactly how quickly that's going to occur, but we can estimate. Yeah.
Thank you. Roger.
Dan, one final question on the section from Wishart to Souk Road, where the plan is for 4 lanes. My concern is for the residents that live along there with private driveways or the people on Cedar Crest. Langholm is already being blocked off. How are they going to be served? Because now they're in the fast lane, going to make a left-hand turn across 2 coming lanes of traffic to get into their driveway or their street, or vice versa when they're coming out of their driveway, possibly having to cross 2 lanes of traffic to get into the lane they want. To me, that's very dangerous. Would we not be better served by just making Machosen 3 lanes all the way along, and maybe as you get close to the intersection, open it up to 4 lanes? Because tonight coming home is a good example. I was in one of the last cars in the left-hand turn lane on Souk Road to turn onto Machosen. And I was barely into the intersection and 2 cars were making a turn, I surmise, onto Cedar Crest. And we were stopped into the intersection.
Yeah.
So making it 4 lanes, I can see the same thing happening and actually making it even less safe than it is now.
Yeah.
So how are you going to overcome that problem?
Yep, it's a good point. And just in sort of general terms, arterials and especially 4-lane arterials are essentially inconsistent with corridors that are filled with single-family homes, each with driveways. That's a really tricky scenario. There are examples from around the region. I think you can point to portions of like Mackenzie and Saanich, Souk Road and Colwood, honestly. It's a similar type situation. If you can picture yourself in the driveway of one of those homes trying to make a left out, particularly in rush hour, it's challenging. I think in terms of like lefts into some of the side roads, the additional lane, the fact that there might be 2, well, that does provide the opportunity to maneuver around a car that might be queued. Or we look at spot improvements to provide pocket left turn lanes, or we restrict certain left turn movements so that queuing doesn't occur. I don't have the answer to which streets might get the specific treatments, but you'd have to look really closely at that. I think in general, single family driveways on a 4-lane cross section, especially with volumes up, the volumes we're talking about in this corridor, it's not an ideal scenario.
So would we not be better served by 3 lanes? Where you have the center.
Can you push your button, please?
Have the center lane. To be able to make a left safely, because really you're only crossing 1 lane of traffic that way, and pulling out, you only have to have brake in that lane to get into the center lane to meld into the your lane. So I'm just looking at it and saying, you know, how much land are we going to have to acquire in that section to be able to, you know, give a center lane for safe turning across 2 lanes of traffic? And is it really worth it? And it's certainly going to penalize the people that live in that area if we block it off and say you're going to have to go out the back way. And I don't know. I hope you're seriously looking at that as just making it 3 lanes the full way, and then compare it to Veterans Memorial and see what the cost difference is. Because I know you're going to have to buy a lot of land along Metchosin to be able to do that. And maybe at 3 lanes, you don't have to go to near those costs. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. I think that we are looking at a long-term plan. So acquiring the right of way will be step 1. How that right of way gets used will be step 2. And there's probably going to be some increments along there. Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I kind of agree, I agree with Roger. And I just wondered, like, that would potentially save us a lot of money capital wise if you just do 3 lanes and it's safer. It makes more sense to me with what's there now. It would be less, requiring less homes to be purchased if necessary. And it depends what kind of roadway is going in there. Like, are we getting the gold standard? Are we putting, you know, active transportation lanes in there as well, and that sort of thing? So I think, you know, maybe there's a way to make the section wider, but give us what we need with maybe less, not as wide sidewalks and that sort of thing, or what have you. So I just think that that might be something that we're missing here, that we need to look at the 3 laning option. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Good comments. Okay, so I suppose keep what's on the screen in front of us in mind. And these are a series of improvements that are being shown under both of the 2 scenarios that are under consideration. So scenario 2D is the Latoria Road focused widening scenario. And so what we've done here is shown the improvements we just spoke to, which are you'll see in the next slide, are included under both scenarios, and layered on the improvements that are specific to this scenario. And so we talked to much of this at the meeting a couple of weeks back, but thought it would be helpful if we came with visuals to actually show sort of what and where, I suppose. So that's what's on the screen in front of us. So for scenario 2D, it's obviously the 4-laning of the Latoria corridor. It's the expectation that over time, traffic signals are going to be needed at Wishart, Latoria, and Byzantin, Latoria. And then if we sort of shift over to Metchosin corridor, we heard a lot of conversation last meeting around, well, if it's not 4-lane, could it be 3 lanes? And that 3rd center lane would be left turn pockets at key side streets, and then potentially 2-way left turn lanes in the center for portions of it. So we took that back, and this is diagrammatic. This has not been designed, but the goal here was to demonstrate where that 3rd lane, the center lane, might actually have some really great value. So the thick portion of the green is extending roughly from the top of the hill at the top of Royal Bay and Beachlands. I think it's caught. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yep. So starting right at the beginning of the top of the hill and extending about as far as just like the far side of Painter. Beyond that, we get into single family on the west side, roughly, and we get into the Royal Roads forest and fence line on the east side. And so sort of not seeing the same level of value in providing that center lane for just one-sided turns. So that's what's been demonstrated here is solid green. The thicker green is the area that might very logically be subjected to a third center lane. And then dashed where, hey, there's potential that can be extended to include that as well. Also identified our signal or roundabout at Machosen and Lagoon, as well as signal or roundabout potentially one day at Painter. And then the expectation that, and these have been shown to be a little further out into the future, but the expectation that left turn lanes are going to be needed at Hatley, Cotlow, and Ben Holmer as well. And so we talked about this a little bit last time. Once you start popping in some of these left turn lanes, widening out the road to accommodate the intersections, kind of return that geometry back down to a 2-lane, that actually gets quite lengthy. And you're getting closer and closer to the point where, hey, a continuous third center lane is going to make a bit of sense in much of this corridor. So that's what's been shown here.
Stuart?
Yeah, good. Thank you for this. A couple of minor things. Where you show coming up the hill from Latoria on Machosen, you show the 3-lane potential. To me, there's no need for a third lane there because there's no driveways or no houses. So, I think the 2 lanes, my sense is, I mean, the third lane doesn't add any value to me. And the other thing is, you have your graphic for traffic signal / roundabout, but at Wishart and Machosen, you just got a red blob, and I don't know if that were to be a roundabout, that might help a little bit with some of Roger's concerns about people having to cross traffic. They may have to go to the roundabout and swing around and go the right way that way. So probably a roundabout there would make some sense.
Okay, good comment. Yeah. I think actually on your first comment, 100% agree. I think the 3-laning would start to widen out on the approach to a left turn bay onto Cotlow is my expectation.
I think that that corridor may also be problematic for the roundabout options because it's a high pedestrian area and roundabouts require a lot of land because they generally displace the pedestrian space and the cyclist space from those intersections. So it needs some sort of treatment and maybe extra widening or signalization, or I'm not sure, but that those questions are going to be more specific to the layout of each location. Kim?
Dan, for the traffic signal roundabout that is on Latoria there. So the first one would line up with Wishart. The second one is at Byzantin,
Correct.
and then there's technically one already there that at VMP.
Yes.
Is that? I'm just trying to think of the length. Like, is that too much in that?
It's a really good question.
We're not moving the VMP one.
There are, yes, that's that. There are guidelines around that, how closely spaced you can have intersections. I have to go back and we can measure it a little more closely. I believe that work was done though for Byzantin. I think it's closer to Latour to Wishart than it is to VMP, I believe. But I believe that measurement's been done, and per guideline, it's okay. The fear is if they're too closely spaced and there's queuing, that one might spill into the other, and you get a kind of a compounding effect. So that's something we definitely don't want to see on this corridor. You can do things with signal timings too, though, to favor through major corridor movements so that they don't stack up the same way they might otherwise. And so that spacing becomes a bit less of a concern. Yeah. Can't do that with roundabouts though. There's no signal to time. They're just the roundabout.
And it's a major corridor for pedestrians and cyclists as well.
Yeah.
So where there isn't very much room currently.
Just a thought on if you put lights in at Lagoon, lights are roundabout, but in this case, lights. Do you really think you need lights then at Painter? Because the lights would give enough break in traffic for people on Painter to get out. I don't know what the volume is honestly on Painter, but those lights will give quite a break in traffic to allow the amount of people. I think they're using Painter to get out onto Machosen Road. But I think if it's a roundabout, then you're just going to have the steady flow.
Yeah.
Has any thought been given to that where one might eliminate the need for a second one?
I think that's a really good comment. So the volumes and the modeling will suggest that unless there's a drastic change in development in the vicinity and patterns change, but Lagoon needs to come first. It's going to be triggered before Painter would. And so then we'd want to look really closely when it comes potentially time for Painter, is that need still there? And if we're already breaking gaps with the light that goes in at Lagoon potentially one day, is there still the need at Painter? So I think it's a really good question. I think actually the other thing to kind of keep in mind here is like our goal here is not to lock in any particular intersection on any particular time frame. It is very much a incremental make an improvement, test the outcome, redetermine when the next series of improvements need to come. So to your point, I do think that when the day comes that Lagoon needs to be addressed, there will absolutely need to be a follow-up evaluation to retest conditions on the corridor to see if and when Painter's even necessary. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
I just have one question too, because I'm imagining that it's because it's already in the plans for, I believe, this coming year to put the light on VMP at Carindale. So, but there's not even a blob. We need our blobs so that we get that a lot of VMP right now is a very uninterrupted commute space. It's getting more congested with Allendale development. I think that the light at Carindale is an important consideration. And it's one where most likely we're considering a light, not a roundabout. I'm guessing based on topography. But a number of the roundabouts are proposed for areas that have very unequal traffic flow at this point in time. So I think that's a strong consideration that they might be better served with a light, which might be more affordable and more pedestrian cyclist friendly. So I would like to see, as our plans develop, the pros and cons developed for each intersection so that we kind of get that informed decision making, that we don't consider roundabouts before we consider lights. Where it makes more sense for a light for a number of reasons. Not that roundabouts are terrible. I'm not anti-roundabout, but I do find that they have some advantages and some disadvantages. I think we should stop slowing you down.
No, not at all. If I could just pick up, like you touched on a couple of great points though related to roundabouts. They do cost more. They almost always cost more than a signal. And they do make a lot of sense for traffic in a balanced scenario where the 3 or 4 legs are relatively balanced. That's often a good candidate location for a roundabout, but whether imbalanced, it's often not. So I think intentionally, these intersections have been identified as traffic signal / roundabout. I think the intent is that they trigger the need for traffic control upgrade. What the exact solution is going to be, if we're considering roundabout or even added turn lanes, we do need to start turning attention to assembling that land as the opportunities come up. But for some of these improvements, the painter, for example, that's going to be quite a ways down the line. We don't need, in my view, we don't need to lock in today, whether it's a roundabout or a signal at painter, just 25 or 30 years down the road, whatever that time frame is. It is more about identifying that a traffic control improvement will be necessary. Yeah. Okay, so this is the 2D scenario, the Latoria widening scenario, with kind of the full package of improvements elsewhere in the network. And then we switch over to the Machosen 4-lane scenario. And so this one, I guess the highlights or the menu of improvements include 4-laning of Machosen for the full extent, from including the portion Sooke to Wishart and then Wishart to Latoria. It would presumably transition down back south of there. Still includes the expectation that Lagoon and Painter will require upgrades into the future. Now, our expectation is that by focusing, widening, and in doing so, encouraging more traffic in this direction, that there's going to be added turn lanes needed at Wishart and at Sooke, and even the potential for like dual left turn lanes to move as much traffic through each signal cycle as we can to not interrupt the through flow, which is going to make for some potentially pretty major intersections. The left turn ads we introduced last time around on Machosen Road at Hatley, Cotlow, Ben Homer. There's probably less of a need for those under this scenario, but still the potential in the kind of longer term, they might be beneficial if through volumes continue to climb on this corridor. And then the expectation also that on Latoria, a signal at Wishart is still going to be necessary, and that Latoria Byzantin intersection as well, and really largely driven by what the immediate development around that location looks like. And so, yeah, so this year, kind of the full package of improvements that might be associated with the Machosen Road 4-laning. Any questions or thoughts on this one?
I think we're good.
Okay. There's some similarities, but definitely some differences too. And this is all really kind of, like working our way toward like a more fulsome network-wide long-term roads plan, which would be like really the basis for the TMP update. But what's really happening down here in South Colwood is quite foundational in all of that. Okay, so hopefully that provided a little more information on sort of what might be included with each of these two candidate scenarios. And I was sensing from last time that, it's pretty clear what 4-laning means, but it wasn't so clear what some of these secondary, more minor intersection improvements might be, or where signal and roundabout might be seen as well in future. So wanted to bring this back to the group as well. Okay, so next we've got some other material, and I'm gonna transition it over to my colleague Ming, who's on the line. So I think I'm gonna continue to navigate the slide deck here, but Ming's gonna speak to the material. So we wanted to shed a bit more light on the model versus the simulation, and we'll touch on that, and then we'll actually show some visuals near the end. We wanted to talk about the exercise that was involved. I've mentioned this word model calibration. So we wanted to explain a little bit what that actually looks like and present to you the reasonably, we think, impressive catalog of count data that's been assembled in Colwood over the last little while. And then, yeah, really provide some practical examples of, we talk a lot about the model, but like, what does the model actually look like? So we've got some screen captures of that, as well as a little simulation that we'll show for the group. So Ming, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thanks, Dan. First of all, check my audio check.
Yeah, you sound
Okay.
good.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some specifics about the modeling work that we have done, and always feel free to ask any questions as I go. So when we say model, is very specific to a model called travel demand model. And it is, I want to just emphasize that the model that we're calling is different to the simulation that we later refer to. So a travel demand model is a tool that we use to forecast future traffic volumes as a result of change in land use network. And the software that we used for this particular travel demand model for Cobalt is called Visum. And for a travel demand model, the input is land use and network. So for example, when we develop an existing model, we will input the existing land use in terms of population, employment, and including all the breakdowns. And also we will code the road network into the model. And same thing, we will do the same for the future scenarios. I have a few more slides talking more details about how we get there from existing to future. But the basic here is that this model provides the projection, the travel future traffic volume projections, and it does not simulate traffic. On the other hand, once we have the volumes developed from the travel demand model, then we will transfer these volumes into a different software package, and that is called Synchro and SynTraffic. So Synchro is the traffic tool that we use to test operational performance. For example, if we have this much traffic that's entering to an intersection, how much delay are we expecting and how much queuing are we expecting? We use that tool to test that. And SynTraffic is a built-in function to Synchro. So we are able to run the model and watch the simulation and get a sense on how long the queue will be built up and whether that will impact next intersection, for example. So there are two different softwares. So I just wanted to clarify that here. Next slide, please. Just wanted to touch base on a little bit about model calibration. This piece is crucial when we develop a travel demand model. And I know there sounds like there are some questions about how the model would pick a route versus the other route. The foundation of developing a travel demand model is always to make sure the existing base reflects today's condition. So what I mean by that is once we develop the existing base case, we will need to compare the model results against the observed information to make sure that the model follows the same logic as of today, and that will give us a solid foundation to predict future. So we have a few bullets here and talking about the considerations that we have been given when we calibrate the model to today's condition, and these all follow the industrial standards. So this included trip generation and trip distance and traffic counts. When we develop the existing travel demand model, it always needs quite a few iterations. And through these iterations, we compare the model results versus the CRD household travel survey, and we check whether the trips that are generated within Colwood are comparable to the travel survey for Colwood. And also, we also check the trip distance that the model is projecting for today's condition versus the travel survey's numbers, and to see if they are comparable. And also, at the corridor level, we check whether the model volumes are comparable to traffic counts. Obviously, they are not going to be exactly the same because also, the observed travel time, travel counts could vary every day as well. So, but there is a standard acceptance for the level of calibration. So, the figure on this chart here is to kind of illustrate how the counts are comparing with the model volumes. But it essentially, this piece is when we make sure the model is able to generate a similar OD pattern based on today's jobs population, and then the trip distance, trip generation, traffic volumes along each corridor from the model are reflecting today's conditions. So that is the basis that we're developing here.
Ming, can I just ask you how you determine the employment numbers?
So the land use, including the population and the employment numbers, are from a large portion of this are from the TIAs that we obtained. So the south portion of Colwood, those employment jobs are largely based on the TIAs. For example, the Peach Lane TIA, the joint memo and report, they are based on that. And then for the remaining areas, that are based on the OCP growth rates.
So you don't have any evaluation that actually looks at what businesses are operating there and how many people they employ?
The number of jobs from the, so for example, I'm just going to use a TIA as an example. The TIA would provide the square footage of certain type of, for example, commercial lands. And we then convert that into number of jobs based on average rates. So for number of jobs per square footage of gross area commercial.
So, but it's only a commercial blob. It's not a bank and a grocery store and like that type of granular detail is not included in this model?
It depends on the type of the depends on the type of employment information from TIAs. So we have
generates the TIA.
Oh, sorry. So for each development application, there will be a traffic impact study, and that traffic impact study would talk about what's being proposed by that particular development. And in that report, there is information around the proposed for commercial areas or proposed townhomes. So that information is really from the development side.
Okay. And if we wanted to look at those TIA's estimates, is there a place where we could find them?
From the report, or
So we're still back to looking at this one study, the joint memo, most of the time?
it's not only so there are multiple sources of the employment numbers. The joint memo is part of that, and there are some other TIA studies that cover the rest of the major development in Colwood.
Okay, thank you.
And we also worked with the Colwood planning team on this as well, just to get a confirmation around the projections.
Great. Yeah, I'll try working to contact them to get better understanding of where they see those numbers coming from. Roger has a question.
Yes, Marcy, I don't know if it's you or the presenter. Is it possible to expand, enlarge the chart? Because all I can see is 2 columns and grids and X's, and I can't see anything else. I have no idea what it's representing.
Sorry, the figure is really just for illustration purposes. The key here is for the last bullet point there, where it says traffic counts, that the R2, it's an indication for our modeling purposes. The chart is really talking about that number here. It's talking about the standard deviation of the modeling numbers versus the observed counts. The industry standard is the R2 needs to be greater than 0.9. So for this model, we have achieved 0.96. So what this is really saying is that the calibration in terms of traffic counts is well calibrated.
I don't think we understand your traffic count shorthand. Like we don't know what an R2 is.
It's really for statistic equations. So it's saying that we have a lot of traffic counts altogether, and then in theory, the model volumes wouldn't match every single location. But then what is the difference in between? And it's not going to be an average difference. So there is an equation that accounted for all of the traffic counts in terms of their values and their number of locations, and then output one indicator, which is R2. And we use that one to evaluate how well the model is calibrated.
So is it a comparison of how far out the outliers are in your data? So
Yes.
your line represents kind of your escalation over time. The X's would be indicating where you had traffic counts and how far those actual numbers deviated from your anticipated growth.
Yeah, the axes are for counts, and then the lines are basically showing how comparable they are. And in an ideal world, they should 100% match. But they will have to be a little bit different. And then the purpose here is really to see if that difference is acceptable or not.
So Ming, is it fair to say that 0.9 represents a 10% variance from what actual is? And that's the industry standard, where anything above and beyond that would be, not something we'd want to plan around. But it sounds like here at 0.96, we're comfortably better than that sort of lower end baseline, and that gives us confidence in the numbers we've collected relative to what the model was suggesting they may be.
I will say 10% is a very rough explanation around it. It's not a simple formula. It's a pretty complicated formula. So, but yeah, that's what it's trying to explain, is that, if it's different, how different are we looking at? So if it's greater than 0.9, which is the standard that we use for model calibration, then we say the model meets the requirements here.
Okay. And I think what committee members were looking to understand is what are the 2 axes representing that's graphed here. So it looks like 50, 100, 150, 200 along the x-axis, and the y-axis looks like it goes similarly, but we would like to know, what are you comparing?
Yeah, so the x-axis is for observed traffic counts, and then the y-axis are model volumes.
Okay, well, we'll have to work on understanding that, I guess.
Oh, so so if and essentially that they are um the x-axis is for observed counts and then the y-axis is for model volumes, and if they are very close to each other, they should be on that diagonal line basically. But if one is a lot different than the other, they would be further away from the diagonal line.
Yeah, because so at the lower end of the graph, there's a lot more counts that are far removed from the line. And at the upper end of the graph, there's a few counts that are mostly closer to the line. So I guess I recognize that you're
Yeah.
to ground truth your model to show that you're within the ballpark of being correct in your modeling with what we're actually seeing in our traffic counts. But I don't understand why one end of the graph has a lot of counts that are further away and the other end doesn't.
So part of the reason is that a lot of these counts are low in terms of their magnitude, and there are a lot more counts that are on the lower end. These ones are more difficult to calibrate because the volumes are lower and they get more sensitive to certain changes. And usually that we're trying to make sure that the bulk of the volumes are following each other. But knowing that some of the lower volume locations might not be 100% calibrated. Okay, so also talking about the traffic counts. So this is one example that we show we do have a lot of traffic counts available for comparing. So as you can see that there are a lot of locations as shown as the blue bubbles. They're from a lot of sources from the traffic count program that COLE has, the CRD, and we have also conducted some traffic counting ourselves, and also the traffic counts were found from some recent previous study. So these volumes were incorporated in the model when we try to compare the model volumes versus the counts. So back to the previous slide is that there are a lot of locations. Some of these locations have fairly low volumes, but we just we compared all of them, knowing that some of these might not be necessarily well represented in the model, but the focus was putting at the major corridor level, where it had a lot more traffic volumes, because that will be the focus here.
And it looks like you don't have any counts hardly at all on Ocean Boulevard between Island Highway and the Lagoon Bridge. Is there a reason for that?
We do have volumes on Lagoon, and I also maybe another thing I wanted to add is for travel demand model. It's really meant for major corridors that serve a significant amount of volumes. And then the reason for that is ideally, as I think Dan was showing that where we divide the Colwood into 22 zones, ideally every single home should be a zone. So then we can generate trip from that zone and assign the trips onto the network, but it's not practical. So usually we have to aggregate a lot of units into one bigger zone. And because of that, when the trips get assigned onto a network, it gets as good as a major corridor that serves a significant amount of traffic. But you might already notice that the model doesn't include local roads, doesn't include minor collectors, for example, because the traffic volumes along these roads will not be very well accounted for by the model. Because again, the way how the zones were created, it's just not at that level of detail. So again, for the purpose of using a travel demand model, it's really for looking at forecast volumes along major corridors.
I guess that's why I'm curious about Ocean Boulevard, because it is used as a commuter route, especially in the mornings, and there is a lot of traffic. We've recently had a lot of accidents at Ocean Boulevard where it meets Belmont, and West Shore Parks and Rec would attest to issues there. So I guess I'm just thinking, if we're trying to model routes in Colwood and understand them, I'm just wondering why we measure closer to the Lagoon Road end, but we're not measuring on the Nob Hill Park end.
Yeah, I have to admit that usually when we look at the traffic counts, we try to grab as much information we have. But there are times that not every quarter would be included. We do have the volumes along Souk and also nearby areas like Golden Stream. So the idea here is that we get the ballpark right. And at a later stage, I do have another slide showing how we get the volumes from the Zoom model. It's also that we know there are limitations associated with this model because because it just looks at major roads. So what we do is we don't really take the volumes directly from the Visum model and apply that onto a simulation model right away. We look at the delta, we look at the difference from the Visum model, and then apply the difference onto existing traffic counts where we have the solid foundation to of the today's condition. So then that's how we get the future analysis volumes and then put that into the simulation model. So that will just add another layer of confidence in there.
Don has a question?
Actually, answer your question more so than the explanation is, when you look at this is modeled on the morning traffic that's all going in one direction. There's very little difference between the blue dot where you see down the bottom of Lagoon Road and Ocean Boulevard because there's nowhere to turn off. The only place you're going to turn off might be into Fort Rod Hill, and there may be a dozen compared to the hundreds that would go through. So it doesn't matter where on there you actually take the volume from. It's going to be very, very similar. What you would have a difference in during the day would be the volumes coming down Ocean Boulevard from the north to south for people actually going to the beach itself. But this is modeled around the morning traffic, and that's part of the commute. So it doesn't matter where on there you'd actually take it. You're going to be very, very close.
Thank you.
And Roger.
Dan, this question is to you or to John. Do you think we have enough traffic counting or analyzers going up on a route at one time? In other words, I think you do a marvelous job of melding them all together, but all those counts, that's probably over 3 or 4 years at different locations. It's not a snapshot of the whole route at one time. So for instance, if we needed 7 or 8 traffic analyzed counters on a route, we could put them up and we would know who is turning where the traffic is going at that given point in time. But what I see here, and I've seen them up myself, they're at this location 1 week and they're at a different location a month later. But the scenarios are all different at that time. You know, there's so many influences. So do you think to get a better perspective, we should have more cameras up to cover a route at any given time?
Good. It's a good point. Good question. I think what you have here, so there's never enough. Ideally, Ming and the folks developing the model, every street at the same time in real time, that would be that'd be the platinum or the Cadillac. But what you do have here is compared to most other places we've built similar or undertaken similar type exercises, you have quite a good catalog here of count data. So you're absolutely right that it is collected over the course of a couple of years sometimes, depends on the source of the data, the information that Urban Systems collected. We carried it out over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks. So there's even a tiny bit of variation potentially in that. We do our best. We typically count, we don't do weekends unless it's some specialized study, but for this, no weekends. No Fridays. We often avoid Mondays when possible. And where count data is older, nothing here is older than I want to say 2020. And where we know the growth has occurred between now and when a count was occurred, it can actually be growthed up at a rate that reflects the rate of growth to account for that. So none of this is perfect, and there's like never enough. But what you do have here is like quite a good catalog of count information. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add on to Dan's note. Yes, for Colwood, there is a lot traffic counts that's available, which is awesome. I have to say that we've seen other there are times that the traffic counts are just very limited. And what we typically do, and we also did this for this project, is that we look at the volumes along the entire corridor, look at the volumes that's coming out from one intersection, and then the volume that's going into the adjacent intersection to see if there is a huge increase or decrease between these two. So to validate or verify if there's something unusual that's happening, knowing that a lot of these counts are not collected on the same day, and there might be some variations in these counts. So that's how we make sure that the volumes are generally that's how we make sure that the volumes make sense when we are looking at the volumes along the corridor.
And Stuart Parkinson has a question.
Doesn't Colwood have some fancy smancy traffic counting software and things on poles, Blue Earth or something like that?
Blue Toad?
Blue Toad, is that what it was? Yeah. And then wouldn't that answer Roger's thing about getting all the stuff at once? Isn't there a number of those units around, or am I dreaming?
My understanding, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, my understanding is Blue Toad is a travel time measurement system where it can determine how long. I think it's quite neat because it can do it over the course of the day and different days of the week and all that. And it can sense how long it's taking to get from basically this point to this point, and then from that point to this next point. And so it's really a measure of travel time more so than vehicle counts. That's my understanding. Yeah. You've probably seen the other, and I don't know the city has them in-house, but you can hire count companies and the CRD does it. And there's either these dumbed down cameras that'll do automatic sensing. It's a bit more old fashioned, but you might see pneumatic hoses that when a vehicle rolls over them, they go da-da-da-da, and that counts as one. And so there's a couple, and there's these kind of radar sensors that can be used as well that are based on like either a laser or a wave being interrupted as a vehicle or a cyclist or a truck or whatever it might be trips it. There's all sorts of technologies out there.
Yeah, maybe staff could answer. I think maybe Stuart, what you're thinking of is we had some special signals that were due to be put in um, on Souk Road. There's 3 locations. One was at Wishart, one was at Souk and Aldine, and another at I don't know if it's Kelly or the next one, the one that goes by the church.
Thanks, Dan. Through the chair. Yeah, we've got several different technologies that we use. The Bluetooth technology is a travel time indicator. We can get volume numbers offered, but we don't use it for that. We do use it for that travel time piece. Several of our signals, including the ones that Councillor Day mentioned, actually count traffic as part of their performance outside of that. So we can download that data. The newer cameras that we're doing can function a lot more, and they're doing a lot more things. They can look at traffic, they can control lights, they can control speeds, they can have their lights be reactive to the speed of the cars. They do count traffic as well. We do have portable microwave counters that we use, and a lot of those counts up there from our own program where we can count local streets. So we didn't use any of the local streets for this, but we do have counts in the local streets. We just recently purchased an arterial collector type counter that's portable. So we will start as part of our program going out and counting traffic on a regular basis on VMP, on Latoria, on Machosen, on Souk. And we weren't capable of doing that before, but now we have our own in-house counter so that we'll start populating this data, putting that data to the side over a couple of years, collecting it and looking at it. All these counts are snapshots of the day. And we'll continue to do that, and we'll use those as comparative times, like a weekday to a weekend, AM peak to PM peak. And we'll give that data to Dan when we upgrade the model again and start calibrating it and use that data to help us get even better. I was actually quite shocked at the number. I mean, Ming's being fairly humble in this model at 0.96 is extremely accurate. The data we've populated it with is significant. I'm actually trying not to spend more money creating not enough value to spend that money to get deeper into counts. I think we have enough data here to reflect what the traffic's doing, and then the fact that we calibrate on an ongoing basis allows us to do that rather than trying to get something perfect that will change a month, a week, a day, a development, a year from now. We don't need to be perfect today because we're going to analyze over time to keep an eye on things. So we could have gotten a lot more data, but I didn't see a lot more value. It's kind of like the decision not to do all the major corridors to their most benefit. You're not getting enough value for dollar to do that. And at some point at the model, we made that decision not to get deeper and deeper into the data collection, just get enough that it was well informed and better than most, but not the best. I don't know who is the best, but I'm significantly confident in what we've got here with urban systems. So I hope that helps with regards to how we got the counts.
Thank you. Roger had a question?
Yeah, John, you basically answered part of my question. Thank you. But I was thinking on the number of counters you have. As an example, with BC Hydro work on Latoria, that pushed a lot of traffic onto Machosen Road. I'm sure it pushed a lot onto Wishart too. So at that given time, if we had enough counters, we would see a reaction to an action that's taking place. And it would give you a better perspective. Okay, if this happens, where's the traffic going to go? And what type of numbers are we looking at? So if you had cameras on Wishart, on Machosen, maybe on Lagoon, and maybe in Benhomer, where people would come on Wishart, turn on Benhomer, come down, and then turn on to Lagoon and go down, you would get a very good snapshot of, with situations and going on, exactly where the traffic flow is going to. And that was my point. If you had more traffic analyzer counters, you would be able to figure that out even more accurately.
Yeah, 100% we would. And you know, we've got many competing funding mechanisms in the city, and traffic's one of them. Parks are another. We've got unlimited places that we can spend resources, and I don't see enough value in getting that accurate with that detail and that information for that process that we're looking for with regards to those smaller corridor streets, especially when it's reactionary stuff to temporary movements with regards to construction and so on. And I think if we really felt it was necessary, there's ways with the model for some of that stuff that they could simulate that with the information that they have, but to the end of how that would help influence the corridor treatments. I'm not sure there's benefit there. Dan might be able to speak to that. And certainly the minor roads, we wouldn't want to put the money into fixing minor roads with regards to those kind of consequences.
John, I just had understood from you in the past that a lot of our data was coming from Google Analytics. Is that still the case, or are we doing it different way?
No, Ming uses that as well as a kind of a verifier, I believe, but she can speak to the Google, to the Google. To Google and how it helps her influence with regards to the model.
Great. Ming, maybe you could speak to that?
Yeah, so if I understand this correctly, I think we're referring to big data. And so at different, there were times that we referred to Google traffic and to trying to get a sense of if we, okay, so once we calibrate this travel demand model, and then we have all these traffic counts. We put the traffic counts in simulation tools, synchro traffic. We run it, and then we look at the traffic queuing in the simulation and then we check the queuing versus Google traffic to get a sense to on whether, first, one, are the counts making sense? Second, is the simulation making sense? If Google says the queuing is this much long in the morning at this intersection, do we see the same story in sim traffic? So that's the time we refer to Google traffic. Is that I guess you think that the case that you were referring to?
Yeah, I think that helps us. We're all only able to take in, I think, a small part of this model at a time. And I've had the benefit of having a couple of presentations before. So I was just trying to bring in all the things I thought we were working with. I thought we were working with Google traffic data. Because everybody has that on your phone, and we all use our phones to see which is going to be the best way to go today. So I just wanted to sort of keep in mind that there's quite a few different ways that we're getting data. We're getting data from actual traffic counts that are done with various pieces of physical equipment. We have traffic counts that are potentially going to be done by static devices that we've upgraded in our community, including Blue Toad for how long it takes you to get from here to there, and including some of our newer, fancier traffic lights that are able to modify themselves potentially in the future based on how fast traffic is going or things that are happening. So just trying to look at where all of our data is coming from so that we could feel that we're both checking that our assumptions are correct, but we're also not missing something.
Yeah, 100%. We definitely wanted to use as many sources that as possible to make sure that we're confident when building our analysis. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so no choice. How does the model assign traffic? There are quite a bit of text, but I will try to simplify I guess the procedure, and hopefully I can better explain this. So the first step for us to develop the travel demand model is to make sure the existing model is calibrated, meaning that the existing model reflects today's condition. And then I was kind of talking about this piece already. So basically, once we confirm the existing model is calibrated, that means we can say that the way how the model built the OD pairs, origin destination pairs, makes sense based on the existing land uses. So that means if we have the population and in jobs in certain areas, the model is able to build the travel patterns between these areas in a reasonable way. And the way how we know that it is building these predictions in a reasonable way is first we check the model counts, the model volumes, trip distance, and trip generations. So once all these parameters have been checked, it is believed that the model is able to develop the OD pair patterns based on land uses inputted into the model. And then once the existing model is calibrated, we move on to the future scenarios. So at that point, we would put the future land use assumptions into the model, let the model run it again. When I say again, it means a lot of iterations. So then the model will generate a new trip table for the future condition based on the new location of population and employment. So that will give us the travel demand under the future scenario for each area, trips in and out. And then the model will assign the trips that are generated within one zone, within every zone, and assign the trips onto the network, because at this point, the origin and destination have been established. So it's really that the trips will have to find its route. So as Dan was saying, that the model does not force the traffic to pick a specific route. It calculates the travel time based on the anticipated traffic volumes and the number of lanes. So based on traffic demand and capacity. And this will have to be done during a lot of iterations. The model will run on its own. So what it does is trying to find an equilibrium environment. So that means at first, maybe a lot of the traffic will pick one route, leaving the other route way under capacity. So the travel time for one route might be a lot longer than the other route. So then the model will rerun it again. And then at that time, some of the people that are choosing the previous route will decide to use the other route because they found their travel time has been really long, and so they will have to shift. Then after a lot of iterations, then the model will reach to an equilibrium environment. And at this point, at the network level, it reached to the optimum point for all these trips that can go from point A to point B, from their origin to destination at their optimal travel time. So this means it's not that the model sees, oh, this corridor has only 2 lanes and this corridor has 4 lanes, and boom, send everybody to the 4-lane corridor. It's not really like that. And it's more like, say if today, if I travel from A to B and I find the travel time has been really long, and tomorrow I might pick a different route. And then the day after tomorrow, I pick another route. And then ultimately, after several trials, I find my best route. So, but thinking of more this at a city level, so everybody's doing that. And until one point, there is this equilibrium scenario. So hopefully that explains a bit more about how the model does route choice.
So I missed a few of the words, but I got the gist of what you're getting at, that the model is predicting where the majority of the traffic will eventually choose to go based on their experience day to day. But how does this model compare with what we see when we look on our phone to plot our route somewhere through Google Maps, for example? It will show you traffic and actual traffic.
This model is to predict future scenarios. So it will, in this particular case, it's looking at the build out that will be really far away from today. So it's kind of predicting, first of all, how much traffic will be using the network, and then predict the best route for this traffic under that build out scenario. Where Google is more about looking at live traffic and also looking at the historical traffic. So as we were talking about the Google, how we use Google traffic is when we look at the existing condition and when we wanted to make sure our existing condition reflects today's condition, then we check our model simulation against Google traffic to see if they are comparable. But once we are confident about the existing condition, then we move on to future, and the model is doing all these predictions at that time.
Okay, thank you. Oh, a minute, Roger has a question.
Thank you. I'm wondering if through the model, if it's actually tested against real time. In other words, and I don't know if you can break the model down to a specific day and say, okay, we're going to do Thursday. And you project and say, okay, the traffic volume is going to be this, and this is the time it's going to take, and compare that with a car that's actually done that route and see how accurate your model is in comparison. I know you're getting it from Google, and that's probably very accurate. I don't know. But I do a lot of driving timing, etc. What route, what time it's taking. And there's quite a variation. So your traffic model, I'm wondering how accurate it is in real time compared to a car or a truck, whatever, is doing that route compared to their time. Has that been done?
That's a very good question. So for the purpose of this model, first of all, what we do is we look at the existing counts, and they are all from typical weekdays, meaning that they're from either Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We typically don't look at Monday and Friday because the travel patterns on these 2 days are usually very different from a typical weekday. And then we look at the average. If we have multiple days of counts, we look at the average of these days, or we pick the highest peak hour volumes from the peak period. And your point totally makes sense. There is variation. What we do is we look at the highest peak hour volumes in that time period, and then we use that to establish the existing condition. And that means, as of today, if I'm looking at traffic at 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8:30, it will be different for sure. But the model is really looking at the worst peak hour in that time period. And also, when we look at the traffic volumes, when we do traffic operational analysis at a later stage, we also take a look at the volumes versus capacity, and then to see how close they are, because if the traffic volumes are very low and they're way below their capacity, normally you wouldn't see a lot of variations. When the congestions occurs, and and vary by a lot on a daily basis, that is a sign that the road is getting to its capacity, or maybe it's already over its capacity. So if we see the volumes are much higher or getting very close to its road capacity, then we will have to flag it, knowing that yes, maybe the traffic operational analysis it's just meeting its requirements, but we gotta be very careful about it, because if the traffic just increased by 5-10%, all of a sudden you might start to see congestions. So there is that consideration about reliability of a road network.
And Don.
Thank you very much. Question about the future state modeling when you're going through this. Is it, when you're adding in your future growth patterns and business patterns, is that also influenced by the model that's I can't remember, the OCP, the targets that are being put in place for Colwood as well? So we're trying to reduce vehicular traffic. So is that influencing this model as well, or is it actually just saying, here's what it's going to look like with this number of people, regardless of what Colwood wants to do around the traffic?
First of all, the land uses are for the build out. So it is beyond 2040 or 2041. And if I understand your question, is it more about, do we have more internal trips, or is there like more shared shifts? And
Are you asking me to clarify the question? Sorry.
yeah, please.
It's more of, there is a target within Colwood to reduce vehicle traffic, increase pedestrian, increase bicycle traffic, more multimodal traffic, transportation. Is this model, the future model you've put in place, are some of those targets being put into the model as well to see what it looks like? Or is it not having any influence on what the multimodal traffic plan would be? It's just going to see what would it be like if we carried on the way we do today.
I see. Thank you for explaining that. In short, this is a base case model. So meaning that we're not adding any adjusting factors to the model saying, oh, we gotta shift some traffic away. No, we're not doing that. This base model is really to come up with the assumption for future volumes based on today's patterns.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
Ming, I think also it might be good to clarify. I think that this model, although it can, when I've seen the model simulation running with that second software process, it could differentiate between a truck or a bus going down the road and a car, but it didn't show bicycles or pedestrians. It basically counted cars and looked at whether the road is full and slow, or less full and moving appropriately. Would that be correct?
That's correct. The both models are vehicles focused.
Yeah, so our model is modeling not that part of our transportation plan as far as mode shift or mode share, but road capacity for vehicles.
Yeah, so it is the trip generation for the future conditions are the same as of today. And so that we're not for the base case, there's no adjustment in relation to mode share shifts. But that's also gives us an opportunity that, in the next 5-10 years, we go back and revisit to see if the trip generation have changed because of all the investments that come in that encourage sustainable travel So that will be something that we know to be considered as an update in the next round.
Thank you. There you go, Stuart.
Heck of a job what you've done here. But from what I'm hearing, that you haven't looked at mode shift, just more of the same, and you based it on full build out. It sounds to me like what we're looking at here is perhaps worst case scenario. And so, you know, we're all optimistic that something's going to be done somewhere about the traffic, but so that's something probably something for the committee to chew on over the coming months of, you know, what do we want to set? You know, what parameters do we set? If this is the worst case scenario and we believe there may be some options out there to improve upon it, probably speaks maybe more to the timing of when these things are done than not, but that's useful for me to have in the back of my head. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Want to carry on?
Okay, so I kind of touched on this a little bit. It's that to build additional layer of confidence when we develop the analysis volumes for future scenarios, we don't take so we don't take the volumes directly from the travel demand model, because the travel demand model is great, it's calibrated. However, as I was saying, it's not perfect. So what we do is we take the delta, the growth from the future travel demand model and the existing model. We take that growth, apply the growth onto today's traffic counts, and then that's how we get the future forecasts on analysis volumes. So in that way, we're accounting for the observed information today, and then we're applying the growth on top of that. And then we will transfer the forecast analysis volumes into synchro sim traffic. And that's where we'll take a deeper, we'll take a closer look, looking at individual intersections, and then check whether these intersections will have capacity issues. Do they need more lanes? So that level of analysis is done outside of the travel demand model, and it's done in a separate traffic model.
Great, thank you. Oh, one more question. Go ahead, Roger.
Thank you. On your future growth, you're basing that on what number of cars per household door, or how do you determine that growth? Because I've heard many different numbers on the number of cars per door in Colwood. So what number are you using to determine that future growth to add to the traffic counts you have now?
So when we develop the travel demand model, the model will assign trips onto the network. So along the corridor in the model, we will be able to extract the volumes, the future volumes or the existing volumes along each corridor from the model. And then that's how we get the growth. But maybe I take a step back and just to kind of explain how the trips are getting assigned onto the network. They are based on the land use by zone. So in each zone, the model will generate trips, and then the model will assign the trips from each zone, and then the trips will get onto the network, and then the trips will be assigned to their original destination.
I understand that, but how many, you could have a household with 4 cars. Each of those cars is doing a trip a day. So it depends on the number of cars or vehicles you have in the household that will give you your future volumes. You can't say, all right, one household or one apartment or one condo, 1.4 cars, because in reality, it might be 3 cars there. So I'm wondering how you determine the number of vehicles, because each vehicle has the capacity to do 1 or more trips per day.
Okay, I see what you mean now. Thank you for explanation. The land use are by population, and so we have the population projections for the future scenario, and they are also categorized by population, whether they are living in a low-rise home or mid-rise home or high-rise home. And then there are industrial standard trip generation per person. So these trip rates are collected by the the practice, the industrial practice here, where they collect a lot of information in North America. So these trip rates are basically saying that for every person that's living in certain type of homes, these are the average vehicle trip rates that we'll be making.
All right. We also have a question from Taylor on Zoom. Could you let Taylor in to speak? Oh, wait, there we go.
Yeah, can you guys hear me there?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, great. I just had a question. So if I'm understanding the model here, so traffic counts today's condition, to me, logically, that means it's capturing everybody traveling through our roads. So that's including anybody from adjacent communities. And then when we're talking about future growth, we're using only Colwood's full build-out numbers. And so how do we account for the growth of the adjacent communities, which we know are traveling through Colwood directly? And I'm thinking in particular, the Langford portion of Latoria, the mass amount of growth that's going to happen in Souk. Just because these, I think, are going to directly affect the specific options that we've been discussing more so than maybe even Colwood full build out.
That's a great question. I wanted to clarify here that the growth here are not only not only the generated because of the future development in Colwood. We have also accounted for the growth outside of Colwood, and then to do that, for the travel demand model, we added external zones as the surrounding zones around Colwood. So when we develop the existing base case, these external zones serve as the adjacent areas. So we also assign traffic volumes for these external zones so that the calibrated traffic volumes also accounted for these traffic that are outside of Colwood. And for the future model, the traffic from the external zones will also need to be factored up because we don't have the details outside of Colwood. What we do, and we typically do for travel demand model, is we will look at the regional population growth percentages, and then we'll apply a factor based on that to grow the external trips up accordingly.
So when you are adding in those external areas outside of Colwood, are you taking into account their OCP growth or just their percentage year on year?
We look at their OCPs. Yeah, we look at their OCPs and then we get the population projections from these documents. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a point to add to that as well. Currently, Langford is working on a traffic model as well. And we have had discussions with them that we'll be able to use their data that they're generating for their zones to add to our zone. So in the future, when we do updates, we'll give Langford a call and say, what's your number that you're using for your external zone that's leaving Langford on Latoria, leaving Langford on Souk? And they'll do the same with us. They'll say, hey, you guys, where you're at your model, what are you using, bringing your traffic into Souk and so on. Now, I doubt Machosen is ever gonna have volumes. Highlands is never gonna have a traffic model. It's likely Vieroy won't have a traffic model. In that case, Ming will have to use those growth patterns. But for that major traffic flow from Langford, we'll be able to actually use their future growth that they're using as they update their model as well. So that'll help influence that decision-making process at that time as well.
Thank you. And Ming, one of the other things we have too is sometimes communities don't follow their OCPs. Sometimes they amend their OCPs from time to time. So how would those numbers be put in?
First of all, it's not like an absolute number that we're putting in, so we're not putting population projections for external zones. We're really looking at the percentage growth. So these percentage growth usually wouldn't vary by too much. Even I understand sometimes they do amend their OCP, changing their population projections, but once it becomes a percentage per year, it doesn't vary by much. We also check BC stats just to see if they are usually comparable with each other. If they are very different, we haven't seen that yet, but if they are very different, we could reach out and ask if they have a more recent projections. But again, what we usually look at is it will be the Langford or Victoria, those major major destination and origin places. So we're not places like Machosen might not be as critical in this exercise.
Great. And Taylor has a question too.
Yeah, it was just the two follow-up points, and maybe you kind of just addressed one, but you mentioned for adjacent communities you're using their OCP numbers, whereas for our own we're using our full build out. So I'm just wondering maybe why we're using OCP for them and not for us, or why we're not both just going with full build out. And the second question was, it was just mentioned there that there's some collaboration with Langford with respect to their numbers and their modeling. But a larger concern might be the growth that's going to go on in Souk, which kind of passes through Langford, through Colwood on the way into town. So I just want to see if there's any sort of means to account for or work with or collaborate with what's going to happen on the Souk side, which we know will travel right through Colwood as well.
Yeah, great question. And the first one, yes, the assumptions for Colwood is for the build out, which could be beyond 2040, sometime far away from today. For the external piece, we take the OCP numbers, and then because some of the OCPs might not be at the same horizon year, so what we do is we look at the population projections from others' OCP and then convert that into a growth per year rate, and then we apply that growth per year and expand that to the next 2025 year-ish. It still won't be as, maybe probably not to 2060, which might be our build out horizons. But what we see is, even if we just build that to 2040 or 2041, the traffic on Souk is kind of getting to its capacity, meaning that at that point, the traffic will likely be capped along the corridor. They might be capped at one intersection, or some we don't know at which signaling lights intersection, but at that point, the traffic is kind of already capped on a SUC.
Or it could be mapped with mode shift also. That's another future potential.
Yeah.
All right, I'll let you carry on. I'm seeing no more questions.
Okay. So now moving on to the model or the other model, micro simulation. So we have some images here just to kind of illustrate what the simulation tool would look like. The pictures in the middle, it's really an image that illustrates the network that's coded into the model. I had to take out the background image, otherwise the network doesn't show up very well. And so there is like a zoom in picture on the right hand side. It's really just to show how the network will look like in the model. It doesn't mean that this is what we're proposing. It's really an example showing the laning that could be coded into the model. And when we run simulations, we look at this network and then we will see vehicles running in the network. So that's how we'll watch the simulations. Okay, and just some images from different software, kind of explaining that there are different tools. The one on the very left, that is a screenshot from the Zoom. And so it's kind of showing the volumes along a corridor, and then the table below that, I'm not going to go into details, but basically the table below that gives us information around traffic volumes at this intersection in certain movement. And then the one in the middle, that's from Synchro. So once we have the volumes established using the Zoom, then we move on to Synchro. We will input the volumes into Synchro. So as you can see, here is the intersection that has a lot of traffic volumes assigned. And then when we move on to sim traffic, we run the model, and then we see traffic volumes or vehicles running in the network. And this is where we kind of watch the simulation and then see if there's any capacity issue. Is there any traffic that's getting queued up? So there are different stages for the type of the work that we do here.
I'm not seeing any questions on that one.
So I think then the last thing we wanted to show off was an actual like video snapshot of the simulation in action. I think we got the sense from the group last time that would be something everyone would like to see. So I think the intersection that's being used as the example on the screen in front of us in the three different softwares is Machosen and Wishart. And so we've actually got a simulation. So the SNP on the right-hand side is a static image from sim traffic from the simulation, but we've actually got a video that we can run on repeat that shows that exact scenario, but how it actually unfolds in kind of real time. You can do all sorts of things. You can speed it up and slow it down. You can snap it for certain portions of that peak period. And there's all sorts of things we can do, but we've just got a video capture that I think we wanted to show that just demonstrates that in action.
Okay.
What's the best way for Ming to share her screen?
I see a share screen button here. Maybe just click it and then see. Hang on, give me 1 minute.
I think once we get that up too, I think Ming, it might almost be great if you could almost narrate. We can watch and listen at the same time. There's no audio with the sim, it's just visual. But you're going to see different colored cars, you're going to see different size cars, you're going to see the intersection operations occurring over time too, the different signal phasing and certain movements moving and others stopping. So it might be nice if we get a little bit of a description of that as we go too.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I'm just moving my windows around here. Okay, there. Does this work? And, oh. Okay. Okay. I think I'm sharing my screen, but I don't know if I am.
Yeah, we're watching
Yeah.
your mouth.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is the simulation. It's one example that we took for one of the intersections, and I think we already used this one at some other occasions. But basically what we're looking at here is, and also I increase the speed just so that we can watch it in a quicker mode. You can see that with the traffic being assigned, there is traffic that's going in through the intersection and out. And there are different colors of these cars. It's really just to show that whether they're going to turn left or going through or turning right. So the blue ones are the cars that are going to turn, and then the white cars are the ones that are going to go through the intersection, and they will change colors as they approach the next intersection. So you might see some of the cars change their colors. But the purpose of doing these simulations is really to see and like visually observe whether the intersection might see some capacity issues, or maybe they don't have any capacity issues. Yeah, just kind of showing some examples over here.
I guess I was hoping we were going to see kind of the simulation where we could look at the difference between, Machosen Road being 4-laned and BMP having improvements done to it versus one or the other, or, to visually see where the choice points are for Colwood.
Yeah, I can.
I guess one is 2D and one is, I can't remember now. I'd have to look through my papers here, 2C or something.
Give me one moment.
That were in the handout. I thought if we saw the model, that would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, just give me 1 minute. Okay. So let me just hang around quickly first. And this is a scenario where we assumed Latoria will be 4-laned throughout. And then VMP will be 4-laned throughout. And then for Machosen, we kept the southern portion of Machosen 2-laned. And then the northern portion of Machosen 4-laned. And I'm gonna speed up this. So at the very beginning, there is not so much of traffic, but let's add a little bit more. You might start seeing some of the, and one thing I wanted to add is that these models, at some of the locations, signalizing, signal optimization might be further required. So one example here is at Wishart and Machosen, there are two major movements that are happening at this intersection. So either that we give priority to Machosen traffic or priority to Wishart. So some the traffic on one of the leg might be impacted, meaning that they might be queued up. As what you can see here is we give priority to Machosen. So there's less congestion along Machosen, but there, if I zoom in a bit more, you can see there is a little bit queue up here, but under the build out scenario, if the left turn gets lengthened and then the signal timings gets more optimized, the traffic here would be further improved. And then maybe I go up here. So here you can start seeing that at the Suk intersection, there is quite a lot of traffic happening. And oh, by the way, this corridor has been already widened under the future build out scenario. So traffic over here. And then if I go to the end, so there is a bit of queuing at Lagoon, but again, and usually they get cleared out within a cycle. If I move further down, this intersection is also pretty busy. And then here you can see that the traffic flows generally well along Latoria. Like that.
And the traffic that we're observing on the roadway here, is that the future OCP
Mhm.
or the existing?
This is built out, where we assume Latoria gets widened into 4-lane. And I just wanted to add that I think they already mentioned for either of these scenarios, with adequate improvements along these corridors, we will be able to reach to an acceptable level of traffic performance. It's just that depending on the plan for the corridors, these intersections will require different type of improvements.
Sorry, could you say that again? Under the scenario, we can accommodate the traffic regardless of the development, just depending what type of treatment we need at intersections?
Yeah, so it's that each intersection will ultimately need certain type of requirements, depending on the corridor, depending on which corridor gets widened, they will require different type of improvements. And if there's how do I put this? If there's unlimited land, unlimited resources, technically there would be unlimited capacity being added to each intersection. So then that means in theory, either option would work to a certain degree.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else that we wanted to watch like for traffic simulations? Okay.
No, I think it's great just to see it and to be able to
Okay.
have that presented. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Then I guess I will stop sharing it.
Okay. And that, where we are on our agenda. Is that the end of your presentation, Dan?
It is, yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Perfect. So that concludes our traffic model simulation. The next was going to be our traffic transportation master plan. I feel so terrible. It's already 9:05. Oh, what is the committee's wish? Yeah, we have minutes to do as well. Just wondering, do we want to schedule another meeting, look at this with fresher eyes, or I'm so sorry that it takes a long time to, but I think it's important that we understand what's going into what we're talking about. Committee? Carry on? Schedule another meeting? Carry on? Okay.
Say more to the staff. I mean, you're the ones that are working all day and then coming in, so you're here on top of your regular days for us, so it's up to you.
Shake it off.
Yeah. I just got shocked. I wasn't like. I think we can get it done. It might take an hour. Really, it will depend on level of engagement and where you're at with regards to your questions. The next phase is really about the traffic master transportation plan and how we plan to engage the public, what that looks like in process, and then what we see as roles for public, committee, and council. So we think we can do it in roughly a half an hour, and then if it's a bunch of questions, it might be an hour. So if everybody's comfortable with between 9:30 and 10 end time, I think we should maybe try to roll and get it done so we don't have to come back another night. Does that work for the committee, Chair?
Well, the chair is very tired, but I will try to do my best to keep up with everybody else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we've prepared a second slide deck here, very specific to the transportation master plan update. So I'll just walk the group through that. I think what I think I've got about 10 or 12 minutes or so of material here. Wanted to talk a little bit about the process that went into the TMP that is now about 10 years old. wanted to highlight, present some kind of stats to the group to try and build an understanding of what's changed over the last 10 years. And you'll all have a good handle on much of this too. And then wanted to turn our attention to what we see this upcoming transportation master plan update looking like. And I think we're very open. We've got our thoughts, but also keen on inputs from the group as well. And that's that. Okay. So I guess before we get into it, and this is very much open for sort of feedback and validation and whatnot, but we wanted to highlight where we see the infrastructure committee being involved throughout this update. I think it's an important role that the committee plays. We do carry out these sorts of transportation plan updates or transportation plans from scratch in other communities as well, and find it very important to get a committee like this in place to provide insight and understanding sort of to our team, to the staff team, but on behalf of the broader community as well. And we're pretty keen on that involvement here too. So highlighted a couple areas where we see the committee's role in this update. One is to provide that insight. Another one is to engage in these sorts of discussions and receive info in advance of it going out to the public. We can both test and converse with this group, as well as build some support for what then we might take out to the community. That's what we see this meeting being aligned with as well. We would love your input, and maybe not tonight, but at a future meeting, in terms of generating ideas for what some of the big picture pieces for the updated TMP might be. We want this group, we would love this group to represent the interests of the broader Colwood resident base. So kind of being ears and a voice for the broader community as well. And then our hope is that we can lead on this group as a series of champions for the process that's being undertaken, as well as the updates that come from it. So that's our hope, that's our intent. Also curious to hear from the group on that piece as well. Oops. Okay, so looking back to 2015. Okay, so Urban Systems, our firm, helped the city back in, it was actually, my understanding was 2013 and 2014 is when the bulk of the work was actually done and endorsed into early 2015. I wasn't at Urban at the time. I was with another firm for many years before being with Urban, but I did get the chance to chat with colleagues who were involved in that process and learn a little more about how that went. So it was completed over 2 years. The bulk of the work was done in 2013, 2014. It included fairly extensive community engagement. So my understanding was there's a series of 2 public workshops. It's an open house, 2 surveys at 2 different stages in the process, as well as discussions with advocacy groups, key community stakeholders, adjacent municipalities and other jurisdictions, things like that. So with that in mind, that the 2015 TMP, there was a roads plan that preceded it. So in a way it was broadened out, but that process was a bit of an update as well. And so here we are 10 and a bit years later, looking to undertake a similar update. And this is not uncommon that on a 10-year cycle, a TMP is updated, particularly in a relatively high growth community like this. So the document is structured, you've probably all seen it, but it's structured into 5 parts. There's part 1, setting stage, part 2, stage shaping influences. Part 3 is called overall directions. It's some of the high level components around sort of the big pieces to the plan. Part 4 is the bulk of the plan. It's called strategic directions and actions, and it's broken down by the different travel modes, different travel options. There's quite a bit of content there. And part 5 relates to implementation. And so I think we're going to work through this update process. My expectation, and we're not set on this, but the structure you have in place already is seems sound. It'll be rather than necessarily sort of break down the entire document. It really is about updating the content that's found within it. But we'll go through the process to make sure that that still fits and makes sense. And I think how the 2015 TMP has been used over the years. So it's guided on the whole, actually quite a significant investment in transportation infrastructure in the community. Fairly impressive how much work has been done over the last 10 years, a lot of it guided by the direction in the TMP. It's articulated the city's intent as new development and applications come forward. It's been that guide that's been referenced when new land uses come online in terms of what the city expects to see for network build out and things like frontage improvement and contributions. And importantly, you've updated your official community plan in the time frame between when the TMP was created and today. And so your 2018 OCP, in particular, the transportation mobility section, was based on some of the key pieces in the TMP. Okay. So what's changed since 2015? I just touched on it. So the OCP that was the basis for the 2015 TMP was your 2008 OCP. You now, your most recent update was in 2018. And so that is sort of a new baseline with respect to land use development growth that is going to be referenced for this TMP. Some of the key, there's maps on the screen. It's the general land use concept from the 08 OCP versus that from 2018. I think some of the key pieces that sort of changed between the two, there's the added land use intensity down in Royal Bay and Beachlands. There's the addition of this transit growth area, which follows a couple of your most major roads where there's policy in place to encourage development and somewhat higher densities along these key corridors. That's not something that was queued up in the previous OCP. We see some discussion around priority setting in terms of sustainable travel options. We see the addition of identified transit exchange locations, a few key street connections, and the waterfront walkway being specifically identified, which then we understand was kind of a jumping off point for a more focused exercise in that area. I mentioned a second ago, and I like this wouldn't be news for the group necessarily, but almost worthy of just a pat on the back of sorts in terms of how much progress has actually been made. We can't always say that when we do these processes, but for this one, a lot of these priorities that are on the screen in front of us that have been carried out already were queued up in the previous TMP. And so when we think about what the update might entail, it's okay, well, now these key priorities are done. Let's sort of update this list to figure out what might come next. So maybe we won't touch on all of these, but some pretty significant improvements in terms of complete street improvements with what's been done in Royal Bay, as well as the work on Painter Road. There's been some and continues to be sidewalk expansion on a whole handful of streets in the community. Some pretty major intersection improvements, including the VMP Latoria roundabout. And then there's been some activity with respect to neighborhood traffic management areas around Hadley Drive, and I think it's Mountain View, which is the intersection we spoke to a little earlier. We also know there's a couple of very significant projects that are in the works that are going to be online in the not too distant future. And so these were sort of contemplated previously, but now they're real. And so we want to make sure that the planning that's updated in the refreshed TMP doesn't treat these as ideas, but more like assets that will be online in the not too distant future. And these are very exciting. So that's the waterfront pathway and the grade separated crossing of the Goose. Some mobility data. And, I might go quickly through this, but allow the group to circle back with questions. So this graph on the screen in front of us is referring to mode share. So this graph is based on CRD Household Travel Survey, the most recent version of which was completed based on 2022 data, and they commonly refresh these every 5 or 6 years. They're trying to do it on a five year cycle. Data is reasonably encouraging in terms of the city making progress towards some of its stated mode shift goals. So a shift more towards sustainable travel modes and away from single occupant vehicle. I think the numbers we've highlighted on the right are articulating the level of change needed to meet the stated goals on a, well, what would have been a 4-year and then a 15-year, 16-year timeframe. And so still some progress to be made, but generally encouraging trends in terms of shifting more people into active and sustainable modes. I touched on this much earlier when it came up around internal trip making within the community and sort of reduced commute travel distances. So the figures on the screen in front of us on the right, 2016 versus 2021, this is reference to trips to work or commute trips only, not all trips. This is the focus of Canadian census data. And so the figures on the right, 10% of trips in 2016 were entirely contained within Colwood. 14 of all trips in 2021 are now contained within Colwood. So that's progress toward within the community trip making, meaning typically shorter trips and those that might more reasonably be made by mode other than driving. The bar graph on the left is referring to, again, trips to work or commute trips. And that's a reference to travel time. So generally what this is saying is that Colwood still has a larger proportion of longer trips as compared to the regional average. Maybe not surprising given, you know, City of Victoria and proximity to downtown or portions of Esquimalt or Saanich or whatnot. But what is encouraging is that from 2016 to 2021, we're seeing a larger proportion in 2021 of shorter duration trips, meaning that on the whole commute trips are a shorter average duration. Okay, so reference back to the CRD household travel survey, which Ming has talked a little bit about this earlier when we were talking about how we build the model and how we assign trip making patterns by origin and destination. Some of that is based in reference to the CRD's household travel survey, which is carried out every plus or minus 5 years. I think what we can take from this is that a large proportion of trip origins for Colwood-based trips, trip origins, they're coming from West Shore communities, which means there are generally shorter distance trips. I think what we take from the trip destination information is that we do start to see some longer distance trip making by Colwood residents, presumably to access employment, maybe education as well. Still some fairly encouraging numbers in there when we talk about a desire to live and work, we'll say, or live and educate, whatever it might be within the community. We are seeing this line up with the commute data from the census that we're seeing a greater proportion of trips that are beginning and ending in Colwood. Couple more here, some information around road safety. This is based on 5-year collision history provided by ICBC. We've got on the screen in front of us the, well, top 9, any intersection over the 5-year period that had 30 or more crashes. So these are your top crash locations in Colwood. A lot of this is, you know, and unsurprisingly, some of the busier intersections have some of the highest incidents of crashes, but where we see lower volume intersections with still a reasonably high rate of crash, that's actually an indication that there's an underlying safety concern in that specific location. So I won't go through all these, but you have a fairly clearly defined sort of top 4. It's Island Highway at Ocean Whale, Jacqueline at Souk, Souk at Veterans, and Goldstream at Island Highway and Souk. Those 4 really do raise to the top. And then traffic volume change over the years. And so there's some variability in all of this, and we are using counts from 10 years ago that were referenced in the original TMP versus some of the data that we've collected more recently as part of the modeling exercise leading up to update to the TMP, but done some cross comparison on volumes. And we are seeing upwards of 20% increase in traffic through some of these locations. We're seeing others that are telling us there's been very limited growth. I think this is meant really as kind of like a high level exercise just to get a sense of understanding and comfort with what's happening. But generally where we see the traffic growth up in the plus 20% range, that generally seems to align with the increase in the number of homes in Colwood and the increase in population over that plus or minus 10-year time frame.
Tell me what those
Mhm.
benchmarks are benchmarking, because I'm not following what I see the percentages up and down, but what is it that we're counting?
Cars. Each blue box has a leader line to a dot. And it's a
Oh, I
reference
see,
to
I see.
that
I
count
didn't see the-
location. We're getting pretty number heavy tonight. But yes, those are some of the key count locations that were data contained in the 2015 TMP, and which we also have updated data for as part of the modeling work.
Maybe when we go to the public, they need some highlights on.
They
the
could,
roads.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. So that was sort of a synopsis of, we'll say, what's changed since the previous TMP was developed. And that's important because that TMP was based on the information, the data, and the travel patterns of the time. And we know that's changed over time. So we want to make sure this update is based on a refreshed understanding of current condition. Okay, so if we turn our attention to what the update process might look like, we want to take stock of quite a considerable amount of planning work that's since been done. So we intend to pull from some of the directions in community plans such as OCP, strategic plan, your Parks and Rec master plan that was done a couple of years ago has some great direction around your trail networks. That's a very obvious linkage to a TMP. And then very specific to transportation, a number of initiatives have been carried out or continue to be carried out, but generally over the last 3 or so years. Traffic modeling work, which is intended to inform updates to the road network. There's the draft active transportation network plan from 2022, which could give direction to cycling and pedestrian networks specifically. There's a series of corridor studies that came before council, mostly focused on some of the more major roads. So that would feed in as well. Some work around transit planning and transit priority. And then some of the parking work there's a few different parking initiatives over the last couple of years as well. So that work could logically funnel in as well.
I'm just wondering how we would fit into that transit planning portion, the ability to have evaluate our park and ride, for example, number of spots that are available, turnover, or whatever. And then on the active transportation portion, because busing in Colwood can be challenging to get to the route that you need to be on. There may be some linkages with, if there's a way to walk 15 minutes and then catch a bus or ride for, 15 minutes and catch a bus.
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea. There's a term called transit-oriented development, where we focus and concentrate development in proximity to higher order transit. That's all in the name of getting people quick and easy walking access to the bus, or even better than the bus, but a higher order transit service. That's absolutely something I could see being woven into this. Similar goes for bike, whether that's bike to and secure bike parking facility at a transit hub, or bike to throw your bike on the bus to your endpoint destination. There's potential there as well. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I won't go word for word here, but you have a new vision and series of goals in your official community plan. I think what we've learned is that the OCP does a really nice job of laying, better than most, I'll say, in terms of laying out some nice, well thought out and deep directions specific to mobility in your transportation network. So we do intend for the TMP to align with that OCP, understanding also there's a need, even that OCP is 6 years old now, and there might be a need to sort of refresh on some of those priorities too. We do know that one of the goals in the OCP is specifically that residents have realistic transportation choices. And so that's something that likely will be a key theme through this iteration of the TMP. In terms of next steps, some of this baseline work has been done. Quite frankly, the traffic modeling work that's been done is all the ATMP work, some of the parking, some of the transit conversations. These all, like, we didn't coin it part of the TMP update, but quite literally they are all previous work that is the back end work for this current TMP update. So, but we talk about what next steps might entail. Engagement with Colwood residents is going to be very important. We want to understand current issues from the community's perspective. I think we also want to understand where residents see key improvements being made. And importantly, probably later on more so, is when priorities are identified in a draft update, is take that out to make sure we understand the level of support among residents for what's being identified. I think one of the earlier updates that needs to happen is that overall framework, the vision, the goals and the long-term network plans are updated so that we can make sure that the kind of the overarching component is reflective of where the community is at now, so that subsequent stages of the update, the kind of the more detailed material, is aligned with where this community sees its vision for transportation. That's a piece that needs to go out to the public, and then it needs to be finalized and ultimately endorsed by council. So we laid out a bit of a engagement process. Admittedly, this is like a little bit fluid, and I think there's a need to make sure that engagement suits community needs and how we're going to get the best and most broad community input. So there's a project webpage that's up on the Let's Talk Colwood website. It's got some baseline information. It's got links to the pre-existing plans. It's got a few sort of one-page short synopsis of some background information. That's all up there for people to absorb and sort of understand some of the exact same things I just spoke to a few minutes ago. There's versions of that up there. We also intend to use that to publicize future opportunities for engagement beyond what's just occurred to date. What else? Oh, so we've got the idea of coming to this committee, obviously. The idea of a series of workshops that engage people in a sort of a more in-depth dialogue around certain aspects of certain topics within the transportation network. Survey. This is something we've found very effective when doing projects like this. We can do locational based surveys where residents can pin pins to maps virtually and attach comments to specific locations. We find that very helpful where we start to see a concentration of comments. That's probably an indication there's a real desire to see change in certain places. That's something we intend to do. Pop-up engagements, they can do sort of open house style, but instead of people coming to us, we try and go to them. And so you kind of intercept them during their day-to-day activities. We find that to be a really good way to get sort of a broad cross-section of the community and do something in person. And then all of this work is summarized in we call them what we heard reports. And so we want to make sure that, especially early phases of engagement, what we heard, there's a direct linkage from that to what's included for updates in the final transportation master plan. So we find this summary documentation of engagement to be really important. So that's something we'll be pursuing as well. And then, granted, we're early stages here, but there's a number of areas that just sort of looking at things critically, looking at the pre-existing TMP, looking at what's changed over the last 10 years and where we understand current priorities to be. We think there's a few areas we can really zero in on as where improvements to the TMP are going to be needed. So better alignment with current OCP and strategic plan policies rather than those of the previous day. Updates to reflect progress since the TMP was previously created. So all those great investments that have been made over the last 10 years. It's time to refresh that list of priorities to identify some new ones. I think there's some topics and priority areas that have risen to the top, we'll say, in our eyes, but I think we also want to hear from the community on this as well. We're hearing a lot around neighborhood traffic management, around roundabouts, around active transportation, the waterfront trail as examples. So we want to make sure we adequately cover off those items. I think we're learning that some stronger design guidance, so that the previous TMP does a nice job with the networks and saying, here's where we see sidewalks and roads of a certain class and transit facilities, but a little light on what those facilities are actually meant to look like. And so that's something that I think we might put attention to, sort of elevating the emphasis that's put on high quality design guidance in here to make sure that what's built reflects what we'd like to see. We're seeing the current TMP be quite light on targeting. And so it has goals, but it's light on how we're going to act, like what we're trying to actually get to and how we measure that. So that's an area we intend to focus on. And more, right? I think we're going to learn what that more is as we really get into the process. Okay, so with that, I'll conclude. And I think, I guess my hope is just welcome your thoughts on what this process of updating might entail and some of the information that was presented in terms of like the change from the past 10 years. Thank you.
It's great. A lot of things. Councillor Jordison.
So while you were speaking, and thank you for all this information, it's really helpful. I had a look at the Let's Talk Colwood site, and not to circumvent the process or what have you, I'm at the question again: why does this committee exist if we're just going to go with what we want to the public? I think you've heard from this committee. I think we've heard from our residents that we don't want a 4-lane Metchosin. I don't think we want a 4-lane Metchosin. I don't think that traffic model tonight, that simulation, was not what we were here, is not what I was hoping we were here to see tonight. That's not the traffic simulation that we saw last time. I feel like this is like a fight between Latoria Road and Metchosin Road, and I feel like we're giving information to the public, but we're not giving them all of the information that we could. We could show them we could give information on 3-laning. We could give information on various different options, and I don't think we have us. I think what people need to see is a simulation model happening, and so that we can base this on something and not just a feeling of, I think this is better, I think that's better, or I live on Metchosin and hell will freeze over before it will go to 4 lanes, or, you know, that sort of thing. I think that we need scientific data, and that simulation, those simulations didn't give that to me. Sorry, Dan, like it was the previous one that council had that showed VMP moving at the same time as Latoria bases, you know, where all the traffic was moving on the different, it was like VMP and Latoria and then Metchosin, and it was one of our earlier meetings. So I'm just concerned that we're just giving we're giving information to people just to make a decision when we need to base, this is important, like we need to make the right decision based on the right information. I don't know how else to say that. But thank you for all this information tonight. It's really been helpful.
Yeah. Roger.
Dan, 2 questions. The one, and I thought good for you guys, where the number of trips, long distance trips, were down, I think 14%, if I read you properly or read the chart properly. How much of that COVID had an effect on that? I know people still, I mean, the government at one point was 40% staff were working at home and schools were closed down and et cetera, you know, and that was in that time period. So how much did COVID affect that number? And the other one that I have a real issue with, and I used to hate my stats courses at university and question exam writing skills. But the one thing I was taught that you can word a question any way you want to get the answer you want. So I would hope this time around, when there's a questionnaire going out, the committee gets to see it first to see if there's a bias. Some of the surveys we've done in the past, I've looked at it and said, this is biased, this is biased. I know the answer they're looking for because the way the question is worded. So I would really like to see from this point on, any surveys regarding transportation come to this committee first before it's sent out to the public. I don't know your thoughts on that. I don't think you're the creator of the questions, but there's been some real bias to get certain answers. And then they turn around and say, well, these are the results. Look at the results we've got. Well, yeah, look at the way the question was answered or asked. You get the answers you want.
Yeah,
That was my observation on that.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think question 2, I guess not certain which survey you're referring to, but I do agree that you can get the answer you want based on how you pose the question. So we'll be mindful of that. And I see no reason why a survey couldn't be shared out in advance of going live. Question number 1 around 2021 and that being sort of COVID conditions still being part of the equation. Absolutely. Yeah. We did look back to the survey prior to the 2016 survey, and we are seeing not quite as drastic, but that positive trend still a bit. But I think it's a good point that we need to be mindful of what was happening in 2021 when we use that data.
Yeah, you're still on. Go.
One follow up to that, and again, I think the numbers are good, where there's a reduction in the amount of vehicles. I think it was 14%, and ridership was up in transit and people walking, jogging, riding skateboards. But is it relative? Because even though ridership is down based on the number of cars we have today, when you add 10,000 more cars to it, even though it's down, there's still a lot more cars on the road. So it's almost a false number is being displayed. Like if we're talking 20,000 cars and we're down 14%, that's good. But now we're talking 40,000 cars, we're down 14, but we still got 35,000 more cars on the road, if you follow me.
Absolutely follow you. And I don't think it's a false number, but they are, to your point, 2 very different things. You're spot on. If we do see that increase in residents, the increase in land use, and the corresponding increase in trips, you know, a modest reduction in the percentage of vehicle trips will still result in an increase in the total number of vehicle trips. So I don't think we don't need to be, in terms of the modeling work we were talking about, it's not a dealing with mode share with the percentage piece. It's dealing in whole numbers. So we can take comfort that that's dealt with there. I think where we really need to think hard is, I mentioned the need for the current TMP is quite light on targets. It has goals and it has a vision, but it doesn't have much in the way of target. It has one target. It's related to mode share. I think we need to think hard about how those targets are arrived at. Exactly to your point, if we receive a percentage reduction in vehicle mode share, that's a great thing. But that we might want to also entertain a target around total vehicle trips or vehicle volumes on key corridors as a better measure of how much more trip making we're seeing on the streets. And a corollary to that, or a outcome of that, is actually greenhouse gas emissions is a big thing for this community, a lot of communities, and sort of doing their part in minimizing that. That's better tied to total trips than it is the percentages. Yeah.
Good. I'm gonna go to Dawn.
Thank you. Actually, you just answered my first question on what were the other modes and targets you were talking about or thinking about. So thank you for that. My second question, which will be my only question now, is when you're looking at going out towards the community, what is the team looking at or thinking about for you said reaching out to the community and going to them. What is that exactly that does that mean?
So I think we had a few different activities, like, so we want to hear from the community. How do we best go about doing that? We had a number of activities that we've identified: survey, in-person engagement, so dialogue in a face-to-face setting, workshop or focus group type setting, even the act of information available and promoted on the city's webpage is a form of engagement as well. So in my view, it's all of the above, so that we're getting both depth and sort of broad cross-section of residents in the community.
Okay. Suggestion when you're going out, and it's more to some of the comments from the other committee members as well, is there's a lot of information here that a lot of people won't look at before they come to any one of these engagements. So really moving it up to and this is where the difficulty comes in, is moving up to a level where it's fairly easily absorbed, you know, that elevator's pitch, versus going through the full amount of information that some will, but a lot of people won't. And so it's really getting that balance of trying to get what you're looking for information in and feedback in from the community to try to get that right level. And I've never been able to figure that out myself, but it's something to think about around when we're going out to those, reaching out and looking at the surveys. To the same point is really understanding what you're asking first, so that we can get the kind of feedback you're looking for, as compared to trying to set yourself up with the answer you want type of concept.
Yeah, I think that's.
And also the volume of information is amazing, but it's not something you read in a couple of minutes before you walk out the door to a community gathering.
Yeah. And hey, you'd made a comment just very quickly about what targets could entail. Some of the things we see in other plans, mode share is common, which you have. Total trips or volumes on key corridors might be another one. A target around road safety, crash reduction might be a great one. Or certain communities are adopting Vision Zero. It's a zero toward zero death, pursuit of zero deaths and major injuries on your road network. I could see that being another one. Greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation, trip making by active modes, all of transit, all of these things could be targets for an exercise like this. I think the work comes in figuring out your vision and goals with respect to transportation, and then hanging targets off of those that reflect where you want to go. So there's a pretty big menu of what we could be doing for targeting. It really is needs to be thought of in alignment with your overall framework, and choosing targets that we can measure, we have data for, or we can get data for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll go over to Stuart.
Thank you. Thank you for all this, Dan and Ming. A lot of information. I heard what Don said about it's got to be a manageable size package for people to wrap their head around, except there's so many what ifs and changes. And I think a bunch of sensitivity analysis would really be useful. Maybe not to present to everybody, but at least to help, what if Metchosin was 3 lanes? What if Metchosin was 3 lanes at OCP build out versus at full build out? What does that look like? Is that a tactic to explore? What happens if, what are the levels of service? We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that based on this intersection is a level C or D, or we don't know how bad it is or how good it is. I mean, I was encouraged to hear that everything that we've been seeing is based on this, what I would call the worst case scenario, the full build out the same mode shares as we have now. I frankly don't believe that's realistic. Something's got to change, and then we can all probably have ideas what that should be, but something's got to change. So I don't know how you present all that stuff quickly and meaningful in a way that people can absorb. Because if you go to the public, somebody's gonna worry about the Suk and VMP intersection, and somebody else is gonna worry about Ocean Boulevard. And, you know, if you don't have all of that information, you might make one guy happy, but the rest of them are gonna leave upset. So it's a big task, and I'm not quite sure how to do it, but that's why we have an expert like yourself to handle that. And the other thing I think what we're gonna need before we go to the public in any great way is, what does building Latoria look like? I know we've heard concerns here about, oh my God, it's, you know, it's hard to build. It's difficult to build. It may not even be appropriate to build. It may also be just another engineering job that's, you know, takes a little bit of different approaches, but can be done. I thought the city was looking at, you know, that. I don't know where they're at, if that's the case, but I don't know if we really understand how big a challenge building Latoria to 4 lanes is. You know, what does that mean about the numbers that you presented and the relationship from one to the other? So that's some of the information that I think is going to be really relevant to go to the public. I think, you know, there's some common stuff, but presumably whatever gets built, we could recommend that the right of ways are taken for the ultimate that may get built. That's probably a pretty easy low hanging fruit to grab and make a recommendation on. Looks like BMP is pretty much a necessity. So that's several years worth of work. So maybe there's no hurry on deciding Metchosin or Latoria, but we should have that information to sort of sort through. So that's just my initial thoughts. Don't have a question for you, you can relax.
Thanks. I guess I'll just throw in a couple thoughts that I've had while we've been discussing this. On the engagement process, one of the things I found difficult in the past and still true to this day is that understanding the transportation master plan is not something most people would bother reading. We did some presentations. We did a lot of engagements before we adopted it in 2015. But it's something that we have to get at a informed input level. So I think that the community pop-ups are less successful because we don't have much of an opportunity when people are already doing something else to give them information and then ask their opinion. So I think in order to get to that next level, one of the things that worked really well when we did the 2018 OCP was getting people to put dots on a map. And in the case of the Transportation Master Plan, we could be identifying areas where they're currently experiencing difficulties in their day-to-day routines. That would be something that you could do at a pop-up that would give you information that you could translate into, this might be a higher ranking improvement than that in the future. The other issue is in terms of transit. Transit is constantly a struggle to discuss because we don't have very good transit, Colwood. And it has been getting sometimes worse rather than better. I mean, I'm surprised that we've had as many improvements as we have had. But that is an area where I think this transportation plan should be informing what we need to do to make it work better. So whether that's getting feedback from the community on where is it that transit is letting you down, or where is it that we need to advocate for you know, a stop or a place for the bus to pull over. And a lot of the times timing places are difficult, or finding parking so that you could drive partway at park and ride options. As far as the committee support goes with this process, I think we do have a role to play in helping to be more ambassadors. A lot of what happens is going to happen through word of mouth. And if our committee members are talking to others and saying, oh yeah, there's going to be a workshop, you know, come on down, or, you know, help to get the word out. We could help a lot in that regard, because hopefully we're going to be your more educated group that you can rely on to help make that process roll out smoothly. And seeing the survey first, I thought that was a really good comment from Roger, to try to give you some input from the committee's perspective. And I'm hoping that this would then, you know, take input from the committee and then go forward to council, get everybody's heads in the game in terms of making it better, and put that forward. And I just had one question, which was, when will we update our model next?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. I think it's whenever there's no, it can be as quickly or as drawn out as we need, really. I think if I had my way, I think the work right now is on the model is necessary to inform a long-term road network that makes its way into the TMP. That's important now, in my view. Next piece could be when we see, I know, a number of new units come online, or another major application come forward, and we want to get comfortable and test what those changes might mean relative to what we'd previously been planning for. That would be a good check-in point for an update. When that occurs probably really depends on how quickly things progress.
Yeah, maybe I guess I'm trying to figure out in my mind where it fits with our OCP updates. So given that, you know, first one was 2015, the updates coming in 2025. So I'm guessing that it's on kind of a similar time frame to the OCP.
Yeah, without knowing exactly what the OCP's timeframe is, what we commonly see is a 10-year substantial update.
Yeah.
And
With
a
a
5-year
five-year
refresh, new
refresh.
priority lists, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
common.
So I just wanted to see how those fit together. John has his hand up too.
Thank you, Chair. With the recent legislation with Bill 44, we're going to be mandated to update out that OCP by the end of this year, 2025. So, sorry, next year, 2025. So that OCP process is going to happen quickly, because we need to have the OCP align with our zoning process. So it will, I'm guessing, create some significant change, whereas before OCPs were aspirational with regards to intent long ways into the future. New legislation basically now says try to figure it out right away. And once that OCP aligns with the zoning, it basically creates a pre-zone where council really doesn't have that zoning piece left to make those decisions. So you'll probably during that OCP process spend a fair amount of time looking at the OCP and what those impacts are in the long term. Because for instance, right now, your triangle area, not the triangle, down in Colwood Corners area, that's massively densified, and it expands out up into Whale and up into Tamarack and into those areas. And right now it's aspirational, but once the zone, if you were to take that zoning map and just roll it over, it now becomes in place. 15 stories in those areas, which may be uncomfortable for council. So that process will change traffic and will change densities, which will have an impact on the TMP. So we may end up through the process kind of following in behind the OCP with regards to its consequence to help us influence the TMP plan. So we may end up going a little stretched further with the TMP to help make sure that we align with how the OCP actually ends up landing by the end of 2025.
That's great. And I didn't expect us to have all the answers, but I wanted to at least ask the questions, because then that helps. It is getting late. I'm going to go to Roger for second time.
Dan,
for me personally, by the way, thank you very much for the presentations. I gleaned a lot of information from it. So thank you to staff and to yourself. My question is, before I could make a decision on Latoria or Veterans Memorial, I would really like to see a bit of work done rather than 4-laning Machosen, 3-laning it and see what the impact would be. I may be wrong in what I'm quoting here, but talking to some engineers, a 2-lane highway can handle about 35,000 cars a day. Well, that's basically all of Colwood, you know, so, and if you look at the old Island Highway south of Canberra River, basically the same situation. Every 50, 75 feet, there's a private driveway. It's just chock-a-block full. And although they've reduced the speed where they put the roundabout in, they say that 1-lane roundabout can handle traffic until it hits over 35,000. Then they'll have to look at a 2-lane roundabout. So my question too is, if we look at 3-laning Machosen Road, and maybe you have to branch it out to 4 lanes at the north end, but maybe not to Wishart, maybe further north. What impact would that have on Wishart and Latoria and Veterans Memorial, in that maybe we don't have to 4-lane Latoria, maybe 3-laning Latoria or leaving Latoria at 2 lanes is sufficient, because every time I travel on Veterans Memorial, the traffic is moving along very nicely. Yeah, there's a couple of periods during the day where it backs up a little bit at the Souk intersection, but other than that, it's flowing really well. In fact, most people are speeding on it. So I'm saying, before we go and spend 35 or 40 million dollars to do Latoria and Veterans Memorial, maybe the alternative, without spending near that much, doing 3 lanes on Machosen, where we don't have to, you know, we have to move telephone poles, obviously, and some sidewalks, but I think that $40 million plus amount could be reduced down dramatically. And maybe that would be enough to leave Latoria the way it is, and maybe also Veterans Memorial. I don't know, but until I see some numbers and some drawings and understanding, I don't think I can make a decision now that we must 4-lane Latoria or 4-lane, you know, Veterans Memorial. Is because really and realistically, at the, what would it be, I guess the north end of Veterans Memorial, where at Goldstream and Millstream there, it's plugged now. So dumping more cars onto it isn't going to help the situation. So I'm just thinking that, well, this might be the lesser of 2 evils. But until I actually see a study done for 3-laning, I won't be able to support this. Okay, thank you.
I think it's important too that whatever our choice points are, and I'm not being as specific about that, whatever the choice points become, we need to be able to show our traffic model. Here's what our traffic model shows us to our residents when we're talking about those things, so that you know, because we're all here asking our good egghead questions to make sure, you know, no stone has been unturned, and, you know, that the assumptions that we're making, we're just trying to make sure that the work is done well. And I know that it is done well, but we want to be assured. And I think our residents are going to want to feel the same way. They're not just going to take our word for it. That we're going to need to show them how, you know, show our work. How did we come up with this plan? Why are we recommending this? And then use their input, because no matter what changes are coming down the pipe, if everybody hates it, they'll move next door. That's the reality. You know, people can and will vote with their feet. And it'll be harder to get things right. So we're trying to get it right and honor all of our residents. Not here yet, we're here already. Kim.
I guess my question too is like, how much do our community want to move around? better when they just get jammed up in another municipality, right? So I'm wondering, like, I mean, I just don't know how we could kind of work with our other municipalities to kind of look at these things, like, there's the jam up, where they go to the military base on the rural area there, and then there's, just going over to the Costco side and that sort of thing. So I don't know, like, I guess if you were to ask a person in Colwood, how much money do you want to spend on moving traffic around Colwood when you're just gonna, get jammed up on the other side? I mean, I don't know what that answer is, but I guess I just like to see maybe there's a way to work with the other municipalities to, I guess the Latoria thing, when I think about it, I think, why would we 4-lane that part of it to go to the side where we line up with where we meet up with Langford, and then we can't 4-lane it anymore. So it just seems like a lot of effort and a lot of work to move our traffic to just get jammed up again, and it happens quite quickly. So I just wish that there was more, maybe a intermunicipal kind of committee on this as well, so we could all, so your work could be for the greater good. Thanks.
Good comments, and I don't think there's necessarily a question in there, but other community, Langford, they are about to embark on their own transportation master planning process. I think and I trust that those conversations are going to happen. Do they have planned improvements up that end of VNP? I guess we'll find out. Yeah.
Thank you. We are at an update. I don't think you're looking for a motion. It's getting late. I'm just knowing that we also had tabled the minutes. And I'm not feeling up to sorting out that motion at this moment in time. So I just wanted to ask our admin, would we be all right with leaving the minutes till our next meeting? Okay, perfect. Well, so we'll leave them on the table and bring them forward at our next meeting so that we don't have, I don't think so. Anything from anyone else before we call the meeting for adjournment? Not seeing any. I want to thank everybody, including the staff, for staying here long and being patient with me for being the slow chair. I am slow. I like it to be slow because then we could hopefully understand things better. But after we met a few times on these things, it'll get faster. I promise. All right, looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Roger. Any opposed? Not opposed. We're good. Thank you. I will look to get us back together soon. If we don't have an official meeting, I think we